What's up, all you hitchhikers? Mikey and Bub here again
Hello.
with another episode of the Strange Road Detours. We got a big one this time, Bub.
Literally.
The tall ones, and the Smithsonian is our episode for today. Just reminding everybody you can follow us on all platforms, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Crowdcast, at The Strange Road.
Yeah.
We actually have links to all of the books that we've been digging into for this. So if you guys want to check those books out, go to our Instagram page. The links for those.
Instagram is at The Strange Road.
At The Strange Road.
Twitter, at Bub Ranley and at Kyle Stonerd. That's Stonered.
On Instagram. And Spiral Mikey on Instagram.
That's right.
Yeah, this is going to be this is a pretty awesome subject. Very controversial.
Yeah.
A lot of arguments back and forth from different factions within researchers, academia, people that are authors and, lecturers, that kind of people that dig in and really research this topic.
Well, it's yin and yang, right?
Yeah, so super controversial. It's super fun to talk about, and we're going to really dig into it. And, yeah, this is going to be a good one. And I mean, really, how I found out about the giants in this subject was when I was in school. I went back to school for studying video production, photography, and had to pick up a job one summer. I was working. I was in summer school, and it was the very last job in the cell phone business I ever had.
Yeah,
and
you
it
had
was
a couple.
Yeah, I had a lot, but this was the very last one. So it was, and it was only a 2-month gig, and I wasn't working in stores, but I was driving around demoing these waterproof Kia Seraphones.
Okay.
Okay, so I'd go to these Sprint stores in Chillicothe, Newark, all over Columbus, and I started seeing signs for earthworks, mounds, all over the place.
It's popping up.
Yeah, so these historical sites, Fort Ancient, the Newark earthworks, and Chillicothe's Mound City, and the Hopewell Group, big, a whole bunch of different sites over there. And so I would just stop in on my lunch break and check them out.
Right.
So I started going to a bunch of these places. And me and my wife were on a hike at Fort Hill, and this is a really cool site. There's like a stone wall there, evidence of smelting iron and different metals and copper. So I actually held a piece of smelting rock, the slag.
Okay.
And these rangers gave us this tour, and about halfway through the tour, one of the rangers starts talking about, there's pretty interesting legends about these kind of places, and specifically this place. And then he just stopped and said, oh, it's really controversial. I probably shouldn't talk about this.
So he was like the gatekeeper, like the key master. He like gave you that glimpse of, hey,
and yeah,
something's not right.
He never told the group what he was talking about. So then halfway through, another ranger comes, and he swaps out. So the other ranger goes back down to his car. So we go around, we finish the tour.
Like one ranger got tired and they had a relief ranger?
Pretty much, yeah. Like one guy does a half of it and the other guy takes over.
Not a full tour.
No, they don't do
I
a full
want that
time.
job.
And that was, at that time, that place was open once a year because it was on private property. So I think since then, they've a couple of different groups have gotten together and raised money, and somebody had purchased Fort Hill. And so, but at this time it was private. And so we walked down the hill to our cars, and the ranger's down there in the parking lot. So my wife runs up and says, hey, what were you talking about up there? You can't just leave us hanging. So like, yeah, man, what's up?
That's awesome.
Tell it, what were you talking about? So he goes into saying, well, there's legends that the Nephilim were here. And I was like, wait, like giants from the Bible, like biblical? And he said, yeah, that's kind of some stories, and that they found these, giant skeletons in burial mounds. And so I said, hold on a minute. How have I never heard about this?
Right.
Lived
here quite a long time.
I've lived here my whole life.
Right.
I'm into really clearly the Strange Road.
Right.
I've been into different weird things my whole life.
You got your radar tuned into the strange.
And I mean, even earthworks. Like, I just thought I'd been to Serpent Mound and Shrum Mound, but I thought most of they were burial mounds. And I thought Serpent Mound was just kind of this amazing effigy that was sort of on its own. And it was like one of a kind.
Right.
But it's just the most famous one in Ohio.
Right.
So.
Not the only one, just the most famous one.
And then I started realizing when I was working for this Kyocera phone, demoing it, and I started realizing, holy cow, these are everywhere.
Right.
They're all over the place. So I started getting pretty deep into the subject.
I remember getting some text messages like, did you know about this? Like, no, man. I don't know how you know about it, but now I know how you know about it, and that's
I think
really
I called
interesting.
You, like, did you know that there's like reports of giant skeletons being pulled out of mountains?
I had not been made aware of that. But I mean, that's also part of your skill set as a natural magnet for things of this nature. And like, I think it's also once you kind of do that once, you're more inclined to notice it the next time if there's a little ripple.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, that just doesn't seem right. It kind of opens your eyes to that fact that there's more possibilities than what you know about, or just as good as it's been reported on or, historically recorded.
Yeah.
Which history is subject to those who write it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I started getting online and finding different researchers. And back then there wasn't a lot of books written.
Right.
There's a lot of books. There's 4 books that we've kind of dug into on the subject.
And also, internet is what it is now.
Yeah, but even in 2013.
Yeah, people are so short-sighted to...
quite a bit. You could find newspaper articles.
You could.
And some of the stuff that we're going to get into. So, but that was through like Jim Vieira. He had we're going to talk about his book, but he had a Facebook page and he was just posting. And then he had a show in 2014, The Lost Giants on the History Channel. And so in 2013, I came across him and his Facebook page where he's, antiquarian, excerpts from these journals, the American Antiquarian,
so that starts opening
Oriental
up
Journal,
your radar a
and
little
the
more
newspaper
too.
articles was just like, whoa, hold on a second. There's people writing about like 300 accounts
this
just
isn't
in
just
Ohio?
Like tales passed down over time, word of mouth, or a little fairy tale here or there, like, old wives' tale. But so do you want the sources for today?
Well, but Jim Vieira was like the got a hold of the newspaper articles, and then I came across Ross Hamilton, and I've come to find out, Ross's book,
Tradition of Giants: The Elite Social Hierarchy of American Prehistory.
Yeah, so Ross, I actually met him a few times at some events at Serpent Mound and different things. He's a super interesting researcher. He writes these sort of research documents, research journals, and he has this particular book, but he also does work with archaeoastronomy. That's the Serpent Mound and different mounds and the alignments of celestial bodies and movements of the sun and moon, and so he's kind of like the OG of the giant researchers, if you will. So a lot of these guys talk about Ross in their books. And from what I understand, Ross is actually a mentor of Jim Vieira and Hugh Newman and some of those guys on the subject.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so that was really cool.
Giants on Record, America's Hidden History, Secrets in the Mounds and the Smithsonian Files by Jim Vieira and Hugh Newman. That's a really good read, too.
Yeah.
I mean, they all have a lot of accounts. Some of them have some of the similar accounts or the bigger accounts, just like you'd expect.
Yeah.
But when you start looking, also the photography that's included too. There's a lot of clip art and
old
photos.
sketches and photos and
it's
drawings.
Tough to deny all of these, accounts. But that's a great book too. The one that I read probably the most or dug into first was The Ancient Giants Who Ruled America: The Missing Skeletons and the Great Smithsonian Cover-Up by Richard J. Dewhurst. That was a pretty good read too. That had a lot of just dense accounts of not just like, oh, there was a giant found, yada yada.
Yeah.
These aren't little 2 or 3 sentence blurbs. There's a lot of real digging into it, not to be too punish.
And they all do a good job of kind of giving a base of like the historical accounts.
Right.
And we'll get into some of those because there's some names that we're going to talk about that you would not expect to be talking about.
Right.
Actually seeing physical giants way back in the day.
Right.
And, Richard Dewhurst, he's been on Cliff Dunning's Earth Ancients podcast a few times. He's just an interesting character, hilarious dude.
Oh, yeah.
I would, first of all, I'd love to have any of these guys on the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
At any time.
We've got a lot of questions.
Yeah, we're just a little show, but we
try.
We want to talk to you.
Believe it or not, we try really hard. This is all been worked over in the last week here and updated the setting here.
Studio is fully updated, painting, rehanging art, resetting complete kind of set deck,
doing some lighting work.
Yeah,
it's coming together. But anybody that would love to come on the show, we'd love to have you. The other referenced book that we have, but we didn't get too deep into actually fitting this into the script and topic tonight, was Ages of the Giants by Jason Jarrell and Sarah Farmer. And Mike, you've probably dug into that a little more and have a little more in-depth point of view on it.
I hadn't had that book for too long, so we got a kind of a late start on that one. I mean, there's just so much information.
This happens every time we do an episode.
It's crazy. I mean, this one's overwhelming, though.
I know, but we should learn from the Mothman alone that we're like, it's just the Mothman. But every time, maybe the Loveland Frogman wasn't that deep of a story.
That was a little bit of a blip. Well, that brings up to the American Antiquarian and Oriental Journal, Volume 9. Now, this is just one of the volumes that I found. And by the way, you can get this book for free on Google Books. And a lot of these old antiquarian journals are available in PDF form. And so I typed in the American Antiquarian, and then within that book, you can search terms.
Or subjects or topics
or
whatever.
I just typed in giant skeletons in Google Books, and it brought me to this American Antiquarian Oriental Journal, Volume 9.
Okay.
And so we'll talk about that. We got a couple excerpts from there. And then our buddy Jeffrey Wilson, we had I had a good phone call with him. Then you guys were on one also. And so he enlightened us on... kind of gave us some perspective in a way.
Yeah.
We interviewed Jeffrey in August of 2018 at an event at Serpent Mound where he was giving a talk on the Peabody Museum artifacts and his research from the Putnam excavation of the Serpent Mound in the late 1800s.
Yeah.
Very knowledgeable guy, super nice guy. And those were pretty much all our sources, right? I mean,
well, we've got some internet, maybe links to some Columbus Dispatch articles. So we've got some other news account reports, but actual books out in the world for sale. That's what we're pulling from. So definitely check those out if you guys want to. They should be in the links for the show.
And we wanted to find out what Ohio History Connection and some of these institutions thought about the subject of mounds, and there wasn't really a whole lot. Other than just saying there's a couple Columbus Dispatch articles that we found written by Dr. Bradley Lepper from the Ohio History Connection. And I've never met Brad Lepper.
Nope.
But he's done amazing work on Newark earthwork. I mean, he has done a lot of great work here in Ohio. And so we'll get into, kind of their stance, the academic stance on the subject.
Right.
And it's
tough.
Yeah. So like I said, there's two camps. You have people that believe that these giant skeletons were being pulled out of mounds. They're documented. Some of the issues with that, and, Dr. Lepper and a lot of other people are, there's no physical evidence of these skeletons, which
that's a tough one.
Yeah,
that's a tough one. And through this episode, we'll find out why that's a tough one too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
as far as evidence goes, because if we're talking about evidence on account reports, on written reports, I don't know how many there are, and that's just what we've looked at mainly in Ohio and the U.S. itself. That's not taking into account the world, the globe.
I don't know if any of this is real. I haven't laid my eyes on
Yeah.
a skeleton myself.
Yeah.
That's 7 foot tall, 8 foot tall. I mean, I can't prove that, but it's just really, really interesting that all these things that we're going to dig into, that there are, these stories, whether it's newspaper articles or journals or, it's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, the reports we have, I mean, they're, again, like I said, all across the U.S. They're in Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, Missouri, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Vermont, New Hampshire, New York, Texas, Arizona, California, Illinois, Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, Utah, Nevada, Colorado, and Alabama.
Not just here in Ohio, folks.
Everywhere. And that's all the states that I know of from what I've researched. There could be plenty more. It could be in every state. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But the descriptions of what they're also pulling out of a lot of these mounds, they're getting jewelry, pottery, weapons, animals buried inside of them. So it shows also kind of a different point of view of what we thought of Native Americans as hunter-gatherers and just moving around and being very nomadic. It looks like they put in, maybe it wasn't them.
Yeah.
But somebody was putting in some effort and had some real talent along the way that, historically, if you think back to your lessons in school, you're like, I didn't get any of this.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't get any of this.
I was way late to the game hearing about this subject.
Right. What's some of the other descriptions in the mounds of this is what you'll like, right, Mikey?
So there's we have an image that's pretty cool. It's it's marked burial ground at Serpent Mound, Peebles, Ohio. So this image is interesting. Who knows? I mean, it's tough to say how big that is, but if there's someone documenting what was being captured in that photograph,
right?
That's some of these postcards are pretty cool.
Right.
There's another one that we'll talk about too. But the cultures that were here in Ohio and in the Midwest were the Adena, Hopewell, and the Fort Ancient.
Okay.
So they're different times of different cultures that were living in the river valleys, and they all have different things different artifacts, different artwork. Their structures were a little different from each other. Some similarities for sure. I know the Fort Ancient is the most ancient of the three.
Okay.
And the Hopewell, for example, was the guy. His last name was Hopewell, so he named that culture. So it's kind of this unknown.
That's so bizarre to me.
They're the relatives of the modern day Native Americans, the Iroquois, the Cherokee.
But nobody really knows who they were.
There's no name. These are all, settlers.
It's wild.
A bunch of white people named them the Adena, Hopewell, and the Fort Ancient.
Gotcha.
So we don't really know what they call themselves. But descriptions of some things that they find and things that are being pulled out of burial mounds.
Yeah.
There's jewelry, pottery, weapons, animals buried with them.
Yep.
6.5 feet, which, that's not super tall, but
I'm almost that tall.
6.5 feet tall to 10 foot tall. And in one account, there was a sword recovered that was 9 foot tall.
Right.
And the skeleton was the estimate of a person, which was something of 18 feet. That was in a newspaper in the Cincinnati Enquirer.
That's a real story.
Yeah.
Now that's a pause button right there.
Mm-hmm.
18 feet. Now that's in the realm of.
That's like, whoa.
We're not talking really tall athlete, sports athlete, whatever.
Like
just tall person in general. Yeah, 18 foot.
Yeah.
I mean, a 9-foot sword. Now here's the other part of that. If that's real, who else is that person fighting, or is that like the lone 18-foot, 9-foot swordsman of the countryside? Yeah. Maybe he was Sasquatch control.
He was the defender.
The Sasquatch eradicator. Sorry, I got pest control in my mind.
Go ahead, Bub.
Yeah. So we've got really, really tall skeletons. I mean, one that, let's just say that's the outlying example that we found. But there's also within the mounds, like the remains, there's the layers of the mounds. Like a lot of them almost had this like structural similarity. but, kind of layering it to basically preserve that mound, because if you make it just out of dirt, it's going to wash away over time. You need a base. You need something to actually give it stability. And, so they would layer it, so they'd have yellow sand a lot of times. They would have clay and earth along some of them. And then they were covered sometimes in seashells up to a foot thick.
Yeah.
That takes
down
a lot
in
of
Georgia.
effort.
Yeah, there's seashell mounds down in Georgia that are pretty weird.
Just to collect those. And then if you want to talk about the bodies they found in the mounds, just kind of their positioning, which I thought was interesting. You see them sitting in a circle, sitting upright, and standing erect in a circle.
Sitting upright facing east.
Yeah.
You read that so much.
Yeah, have
facing
definite direction.
Standing upright and like all looking at each other. Reminded you of Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls, Indiana Jones.
Yeah. But they were facing inward.
Yeah.
And that was,
were they
kind of like
facing
a
outward?
council.
Yeah.
This, I think they're facing outward, which is what? I mean, is that just like,
some sort of deep spiritual
religious belief or spiritual belief?
Yeah.
They have that, does that have a significance? That's what I kind of know. Is there significance to why you're putting them in that format? I'm sure if you're doing these ritualistic burials as well, or it seems to be some kind of ceremonial burials going on, that they take a lot of effort at that time.
Yeah. Yep.
Does that just show their values of life and being alive? Or is that because it's such a small amount of people in a culture and the significance goes up to each relative member of that group?
Yeah, it's just a lost culture.
Yeah. I know that a lot of the burials and the mounds that were more significant, or the skeletal remains that they would find within those mounds, are more significant in the fact of what they were buried with. The adornments and things like that. But the Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, I think this is
real
your
quick
spot.
before Chaco, the stone chambers.
That's it. I didn't read that one.
Yeah, stone chambers. So inside some of these mounds, they'll have these megalithic stone. There's some in Indiana, and it's essentially the earthwork itself, the whole outside is earth and clay, but on the inside is sort of like this mini chamber. Not many, but these decent sized chambers. Yeah. And that's where a lot of these giant skeletons were found, is in these kind of strange stone chambers. And on the East Coast, there's a lot of stone chambers in New York and, all through New Hampshire and up and down the East Coast. And then even in the desert, Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, place that me and my wife have been there. Fantastic ruins, Pueblo Bonito. There's a series of six-toed footprints that they found.
That's strange.
This is in the 1890s in Crittenden, Arizona. They uncovered a giant granite coffin that was 12 feet in length.
Jeez.
But the only thing left was a six-toed foot. So, again,
that's just
strange things.
It's bizarre. The six-toed foot is throwing me right now. I mean, that's
also double rows of teeth.
That was common in the skulls.
Accounts of double rows of teeth. Not always, but a lot more on the East Coast. That Jim Vieira, he's from, I believe, Maryland, and so he was kind of getting into giants and uncovering on the East Coast, and he was running into a lot of the double rows of teeth.
And good teeth.
Yeah,
I mean, they were
teeth were
well
perfect.
preserved over time.
These people were super healthy.
Yeah.
I mean, their body structure, they must have been muscular. They talk about how just brute strength and wide shoulders and perfect teeth and just very, very healthy skeletons.
A different breed.
Some of them were so old that they would just disintegrate once the air hit it, and you open up a chamber and
the bones when they would
bones
bring
would just
kind
of crumble. You hear that, some of the objects found are the mica hand, which is a really famous artifact from Ohio. There's the clay ceremonial mask from Sipe Mound. And then stone projectiles, arrowheads, fish hooks, bone awls, needles, shell ornaments, ashes of campfire.
Yep.
There's shells from the Gulf Coast, obsidian from North Carolina, which sort of reveals a trading network of some sort.
Yeah.
Pretty vast, using probably these river valleys and river systems to travel all over the place.
Right.
And, there's strange tablets that are highly controversial, artifacts that have ancient Hebrew, some Phoenician writing. It's like an amalgamation of these different languages and characters. So the thought is there that, most of these were faked. It's like the dude wanted to get written up in the newspaper. The Brush Creek tablet's a famous one. Dr. Bradley Lepper writes an article in the Columbus Dispatch that, I believe that one's a total fake. I mean, the dude legit got caught trying to pay off a worker to carve this skeleton fake and carve the tablet. And you could tell he didn't know what he was doing because he's using all these different characters and paid some guy to create this tablet. I mean, and so there's tons of hoaxes. The Cardiff Giant, huge hoax that was proven to be completely fake. I think we have a little bit about that.
Yeah.
But, so, this is back in the day when you have like all these snake oil salesmen running around trying to rip people off. And side attractions. Hell, P.T. Barnum was one of the guys that was in on showing the Cardiff Giant around.
Oh, my gosh.
So he was one of these kind of, it's pretty well documented. P.T. Barnum, before he got he was pretty much a con man.
Well,
in a lot of ways, he was ripping people off with these kind of freak show attractions, and and he was just,
it was kind of up his alley.
He was a hustler.
Well,
so giant skeletons, somebody like P.T. Barnum, he's all in.
Throw it in the mix.
Yeah.
Let me get that.
Exactly.
Oh, that's awesome. How you like the copper gorget plates?
The copper gorget plates.
Now, what's a gorget?
A gorget is?
It is this, like a neck piece, right? Like maybe even like the Egyptians kind of wear it, but it goes up around the neck, over the front of the collarbone and the chest, and maybe down the back a
Very
little bit.
ornate.
Yeah, and I mean, again, working with copper metals, using copper tools, making copper jewelry. Again, just one of these misconceptions that we apply to, they were just
Middle Eastern people and
very
Egypt.
Low intelligence people that shouldn't be able to make this, or we just never had the opportunity to give them credit for it.
We never learned in school that people were making smelting metal. I mean, we were told that the Native Americans just had arrowheads, and they weren't advanced, and they were
didn't even have saddle,
basically savages, which now we know that that's absolutely horse shit.
Yeah.
And
in quite a big way.
Yeah, and the ancestors of the Native Americans, and so many different, and who built the mounds? That's the huge question. Who were the mound builders? Was it the relatives of the Native Americans, their ancestors, or this priestly kind of kingly class of these giant people,
ancient race?
And some of the things they found, copper crowns.
Right.
A copper crown on one of these big guys being pulled out with a copper gorget. And so, maybe they all lived together. Maybe they're in ancient times here in North America, it was small people, tall people, people like, normal sized people like us today. Maybe there was just these races that were living together.
Well, and perhaps a more differentiation of race is, if you're in a tribe or a tribalized system at that point, you don't join another tribe.
Yeah.
You stay in your tribe, and that's much smaller, and it doesn't make as many people necessarily because you have to take care of that whole tribe. So if there's a bunch of individual different styles, instead of now, and nothing against this, but, having any kind of like separation on that level, you'd have to be on an island somewhere where you're just not making it back and forth to get different bloodlines together and different genetics and DNA to come up with all the varieties we have. But you don't have the densely populated singular tribes like that.
Exactly.
It could be.
Exactly.
But I mean, some we're not sure who they were. Nobody has a hard and fast answer on that. And that's one of the most frustrating things about this as well, is trying to figure out, where did this actually begin? There's a lot of guesswork.
Yeah, I mean, the Adena, the Hopewell, for sure, the Fort Ancient, for sure they built earthworks and mounds.
Right,
The
but not all of
question
them.
that I have is, were they a culture that came later and basically repurposed the earthworks and mounds, and then kind of added their own religion and kind of built off
Egyptian style,
off of an older culture,
yeah,
which you see in Pumapunku in South America, in Cusco, Peru, where there's these giant megalithic, huge stones,
right?
And then you see kind of the Inca, or who are more rudimentary stonework, and so they're kind of building on top of that. And who's to say that didn't happen here? Maybe there was this sort of more ancient civilization, but again, I definitely do not know 100%. These are just things that have been out there, theories, ideas, but it's not to say that the Native Americans, their ancestors, did not contribute to these in some way. That maybe it was this sort of mixed culture, and they were all together and contributing to these. Who knows? So Mastodon elephant pipes, Louisa County, Iowa, is the only one ever found, carved from solid stone, and it's located at the Museum of the Academy of Sciences in Davenport.
Yeah.
So you definitely need to Google that.
Those are cool.
And we have a pretty special artifact here from Ohio that it's the Adena pipe, figure of a man. And this is actually the logo on the Strange Road Detours, our little orange sign.
Yeah.
And we love this little guy, and we incorporated him into our logo and brand.
I mean, that's some cool artwork and
it's so
nice
cool
crafting going on.
Yeah, it's so cool. But Adena is a Hebrew word given to places for the delightfulness of the situation. So, again, Adena is sort of this name that was given to this culture. And this was 800 BC, they think. And that was found in Chillicothe in 1901, which that's our little buddy.
That was so funny when you said, that's the logo for the Strange Road on the sign.
Detour.
I thought that was hilarious. So next we're going to get into, the aspect of giants throughout history. And in one of the biggest books in the Bible, not everybody maybe, but a lot of shows that have talked about it. You see it on Ancient Aliens quite a lot. They talk about the Nephilim, but you hear it in just, I guess, if you're in that kind of conversational circle, you come across this term quite often.
Yeah.
But in the Bible, it goes quite interestingly. But when people began to multiply on the face of the ground and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that they were fair, and they took wives for themselves of all that they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in mortals forever, for they are flesh. Their days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humans, who bore children to them. These were the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown.
That's Genesis.
It comes out pretty openly and states what happened.
What is that? Genesis 6:1-4, and that's the New Revised Standard Version of the Old Testament.
Yeah. So, it comes out kind of, openly and states it.
And these are just a couple. There's giant accounts. You have David and Goliath. That's probably one of the most famous ones in the Bible.
Right.
And then here's another one. Go ahead and check this one out.
The Lord said to Moses, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. So they went up and spied out the land, and they told him, Yet the people who live in the land are strong, and the towns are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. So they brought to the Israelites an unfavorable report of the land that they had spied out, saying, The land that we have gone through as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great size. There we saw the Nephilim. The Anakites come from the Nephilim, and to ourselves we seemed like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. So it's not just on their perspective of thinking, man, these are big people. That's represented in both of those aspects, and that comes from Numbers 13, 1-2, 21, 27 through 28, and 32 through 33 in the New Revised Standard Version.
So there's a couple of little excerpts from the Bible about giants. Hugh Newman, he's one of the co-authors of Giants on Record. He talks about giants in England.
Okay.
Specifically Legends of Stonehenge. And
this is
all of the different names that before it was called Stonehenge.
I didn't know any of this.
Stonehenge was in ancient times called the Giant's Dance. Okay. And the Giant's Grave, Giant's Hill, Giant's Causeway, the Sleeping Giant, Giant's Well, Giant's Bed. So
it's a little bit of a theme.
Yeah. So Stonehenge, before it was called Stonehenge, it was Giants, you name it. Okay. So
Giants,
and,
you name it.
And we were lucky enough to go in 2018. And
that's awesome.
Stone actually took this image here, beautiful shot. And what'd you shoot that on, Stone?
Yashica 124 and 120 millimeter. I think it was Ektar.
Beautiful. God, follow him at Kyle Stoner. He's got tons of cool film photography up there, guys. And so the earliest known depiction of Stonehenge shows a giant helping Merlin the wizard building a great stone circle. This was Le Roman de Brute by poet Wace, dated back to 1150 AD. He painted this based on the history of the kings of Britain by Geoffrey Monmouth. So that's kind of a interesting account from back to 1150. And then, Bub, you want to take the lead on this one?
Yeah, I love this. So next we have the Magellan encounter. And
Magellan, like Magellan.
Magellan.
The Magellan.
Well referenced and probably unknown to most, younger people today, Magellan, or maybe they do know through just GPS systems. But that is a real person as well, or was. But the Magellan giant encounter is kind of interesting. It comes from Jim Vieira and Hugh Newman in their book Giants on Record.
Dewhurst has it in his too.
Dewhurst does as well.
Yeah. Probably Ross does as well.
Yeah, it dates back to 1520 with the Patagonian giants, which Patagonia, South America, the very
tip. Yep. Not the clothing brand, that like real Patagonia.
Named after the place. But yeah, Magellan, while sailing around Patagonia, encountered, per the referenced account, a naked giant dancing and singing on the shore. So he looked at one of his men and kind of told him to make contact and befriend the giant by dancing and singing in the same manner. So he wanted to go down there, interact with him, and become friends with this giant, which is just amazing to me. Like, could you imagine being the guy who's like, hey, why don't you go down there and hang out with this dude that's got this fire going on and dancing and singing? So in the diary by Antonio Pigafetta that he wrote about traveling with Magellan, called Magellan's Voyage, a narrative account of the first circumnavigation, he wrote, when he was before us, the giant, he began to marvel and to be afraid, and he raised one finger upward, believing that we came from heaven. And he was so tall that the tallest of us only came up to his waist. So I'd put that in the giant category. That's a fairly big guy.
And that image there was sketched by one of the guys that was on that expedition. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so that image that's actually up right now is from Magellan's Voyage, a crew member from that trip.
Holy cow.
I don't know if we have the guy that drew it in here. Might have missed that. We could probably put a link, something like that. But
yeah.
And basically, they went up on shore.
Yeah.
And hung out with this tribe of these Patagonian giants.
Yeah. So they spent some time with them on the island with the huge natives, and then Magellan and his crew came up with a plan to get two of the giants on their ship,
right,
to bring them back to Europe.
They wanted to prove that they were real. So they basically kidnapped.
They did.
They kidnapped them.
They kidnapped them.
But what happened?
They died.
They died on the voyage.
While en route, and nobody knows what happens to the bodies.
The bodies were clearly probably thrown off. I mean, why would you want two rotting giant corpses? I mean, you're talking disease. I mean, you want to talk about COVID-19 right now.
You think they just got seasick?
And they just gone. So probably was no chance to bring back a bone or a skull. They probably just...
It's just bold.
Who knows if it's real, though?
It's just bold.
Could be... But, I mean, it's Magellan. He's a pretty respected dude throughout history.
Let's give it just a slight aspect of slant that maybe the guy writing the journal or the diaries...
Maybe he was a hoaxer.
Maybe they wrote it to sensationalize it. We could go that route. Yeah. It seems like that's not the case because it's not a isolated incident. They were not the only explorers and travelers to have that encounter. Not the exact verbatim.
No.
But a lot of people exploring and traveling
like
through South
DeSoto,
America. Yeah.
DeSoto, the explorer, he came up through the Mississippi River. He came up through the Gulf Coast. And the Spanish explorer DeSoto, he went up through and saw tribes of little pygmies, tribes of 8-foot-tall tribes. I mean, so these accounts of giants in the flesh, I'm not talking about giant skeletons being buried in mounds, but you have
these are living in front of people,
documenting, interacting with live, massive tribes of people living alongside regular Native American tribes. Some of these guys, like the Osage, there's a really awesome image from the one of these Osage tribes that Ross Hamilton talks about, and it's pretty interesting that going up through the Mississippi River, you have not just one but several encounters, DeSoto and all those guys, with tribes of all kinds of different sizes and shapes back in the 1500s. So really, really cool to see that.
Yeah.
And so managed to get 2 on the ship. Really?
That takes a little bit of, I don't even want to know how. How do you do that?
They probably tricked them. Who knows?
How do you talk to them? How do you talk to a giant?
So this is, I think this one was from the Natural and Aboriginal History of Tennessee. I think we got this from maybe Dewhurst.
I think this is Dewhurst, yeah. In 1768, John Haywood, and this was at Sacred Pools, Secret Caves in the Halls of the Mountain Kings. I think that was the headline.
That was the headline of newspaper.
Yeah, and they were talking about, many amazing discoveries, giants found. There was a walled spring inside this place. The caves had this kind of like, Goonies fantastical-esque stones that would roll away, and there would be more giants inside those rooms. They had
4 of them were upright and standing.
Yeah.
Like upright and standing, and formed in basically a square box.
That's so weird.
And then inside that, there's another body of a giant.
Yeah.
So they're in a square, and then inside that square is another body. According to this Natural and Aboriginal History of Tennessee.
That's so wild.
Now, this was really interesting when I got into all this in 2013. One of the first things you'll find is a quote by Abe Lincoln.
Right.
Abe Lincoln has a speech from Niagara Falls, and it's I think it was 1851, something like that. And this quote, Abraham Lincoln says, "But still there is more. It calls up the indefinite past, when Columbus first sought this continent, when Christ suffered on the cross, when Moses led Israel through the Red Sea, nay, even when Adam first came from the hand of his Maker, then as now, Niagara was roaring here. The eyes of that species of extinct giants, whose bones fill the mounds of America, have gazed on Niagara as ours do now. Contemporary with the whole race of men, and older than the first man, Niagara is strong and fresh today as 10,000 years ago. The mammoth and the mastodon, now so long dead, that fragments of their monstrous bones alone testify that they ever lived, have gazed on Niagara. In that long, long time, they never still for a single moment, never dried, never froze, never slept, never rested." So that's your boy Abe Lincoln.
What?
Giving a speech referencing giants being pulled out of mounds.
You think he was just, feeling nostalgic because he himself was some kind of a giant?
He was tall. He was pretty tall. He probably had a connection.
And we're not talking just the top hat.
Yeah.
That top hat, didn't do him any service getting through doorways because he was already fairly tall. But that quote, you know what I mean?
I do know what I mean.
But, I mean, look at that quote. That talks on kind of an interesting broad spectrum of not just giants, but even historically of like the mammoth and the mastodon.
Yeah.
Roaming. I mean, were they running into that kind of stuff as well? Were they digging that up as early settlers? Were they, pulling that stuff out of the ground? Like, what is he referencing there? That's interesting. I don't know how he came up with that. And also to just sit and stare at something like Niagara Falls and come up with that.
In the mid-1800s, everybody was talking about giant skeletons and mounds and artifacts, and everybody was out there digging mounds up. Well, tons of people were. So it was in the newspapers.
Just a fire sale for it.
Yeah. Moving on to Native American accounts.
Yes. This part, I think I came across again in, was this in Ross Hamilton's book?
Yep.
Native American accounts. We're talking about this tribe, the Lenni Lenape Indians, and they were often referred to as a tribe of giants. They were also referred to in the history as the Tall Ones. Their name translates as the real people or the human beings in the Unami language. The Copper Culture tribes of Michigan were called Old People. Anasazi of the Southwest, who were called the Ancient Ones. So there's all of these names and kind of myth and lore tied into the description of these tribes. Like, they weren't like, we just got here. Mm-hmm. It almost seems like been forever, or like from the inception of time of humanity, or maybe the birth of the age of humanity. And so it again makes me think, man, I missed out a lot on the history of Native American culture, and not that I would have a lot of exposure to that, right?
Yeah,
you got to go looking for it.
Yeah, I mean, their cultures were completely destroyed. Their records, their stories, their languages. You can't put people in these concentration camps and force them to be Catholics and Christians,
right?
And expect them not to have this oral tradition completely obliterated,
right? Right, and that's what was going on.
Manifest destiny. Moving them across, out west, especially here in Ohio. I mean, this was full of different tribes,
right?
And they were pushing onward, manifest destiny, and it was
basically relocating them all.
Yes, exactly.
Because originally the Lenni Lenape said they came from a distant country, but their tribe started moving east. And when they were moving east, they ran into the Mengwe, or the other terminology for that tribe is the Iroquois, who said they also immigrated from a distant country and were also moving east.
Yeah.
So while they're moving east,
they're coming from the west.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. The Lenni Lenape, when they were coming over east, they sent out spies forward to, look over the land in the country east of the Mississippi, and they found out it was inhabited by a very powerful nation who had many large towns built on the great river flowing through their land. So there's already an established society.
Yep.
And this, according to the account by Hamilton, is the Allegheny or the Allegheny people, and believe it or not, this is a race to have been known to be even greater in stature than the Lenni Lenape. So we start talking about giants and large races. There's a lot of them.
The copper mines up north, they're connected with the Allegheny and the Allegheny. They're known for massive earthworks throughout the Lake Erie and Lake Huron, and
bodies of water.
Tall, stout, very large, larger than the Lenni Lenape. And, so you have these accounts are pretty interesting. These stories that are kind of being passed down of these tribes that have, they're established. They have cultural names and heritage. And it seems like more than a legend to me. It seems like,
right.
It
seems
oral
to have
tradition. You can't discount it. Did they have writing? There's evidence that maybe, they did have writing actually.
Right.
And this one was kind of cool. The Firelands Pioneer Memoirs of Township. This is 1855 from Vermilion, Ohio. This is a story told to pioneers from Native Americans.
From the Native Americans.
Yeah, so when the pioneers are moving into the area, they're interacting and they're hearing stories. The Native Americans said that the first people to occupy that land were these people that were very large size. There's a race of red-bearded giants and black-bearded giants.
This is a part I like.
Okay.
This is strange.
And basically the red-bearded Indians they were recruiting Native American tribes to go against the black-bearded giants, and they actually ran them out of town. So there was this war between the red-haired giants, the black-haired giants. There's accounts of black beard, like some of these bodies being pulled out. The hair is
still
jet black,
Yeah.
still on them.
Yeah.
The red hair, Lovelock Cave, Nevada, which, David Hatcher Childress was one of the guys that kind of really dug into
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Your boy DHC.
We love DHC.
DHC, we
You're
want to
awesome,
have you on our
David.
show too. Yeah, big inspiration.
You're great.
And then the Choctaw, and this Horatio Bardwell, Horatio Cushman. He wrote in 1899, and this was the history of the Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Natchez, and basically said that there's a race of giants that once inhabited their land, which is now the state of Tennessee, and basically they fought them, and when they arrived from Mississippi, and so another account of kind of these encounters and these wars with these race of large people, and they were their tradition states that the Nahulo is what they called them, were wonderful in stature. So then you have the Comanche.
Chief Rolling Thunder of the Comanches, a tribe from the Great Plains, gave the following account of an ancient race of white giants in 1857. And he goes on to say in the account, innumerable moons ago, a race of white men, 10 feet high and far more rich and powerful than any white people now living, here inhabited a large range of country, extending from the rising to the setting sun. Their fortifications crown the summits of the mountains, protecting their populous cities situated in the intervening valleys. So again, they're in areas, that have some protection.
Yeah.
Down in the valley system, I'm sure they're around water somewhere. Big people. How can you be 10 feet tall?
Some people get hung up with the accounts of these white giants.
Yeah.
And so, the people get upset. It's like, hey, you want to give the credit to a large race of white people for building the mounds and earthworks, but there's not just white giants.
Well,
There's
that gets
all
conflicting.
kinds of different, the accounts of the Osage and the Lenni Lenape. I'm not sure if we showed that image of the Lenni Lenape, but yeah, cool. And so that one was really interesting.
And the Navajo
they
as
look
well.
very, extremely. They're not white. They
Right.
have features of Native Americans, but they're just bigger.
Right.
So why is it so difficult to comprehend that maybe there was this? Maybe America was always a melting pot.
Even
Maybe there
before
were
we
always different
Yeah.
races of big people, medium-sized people, small people, different races, different colored hair, eyes, the whole 9 yards. Maybe they just all lived. Yeah, they had their wars and their battles like everyone else.
Right.
But a lot of the academics, they really get hung up because they're kind of telling, some of these alternative researchers and authors, like the guys that we are covering, they get upset and say, hey, well, you're racist. You want to give credit to these, tall white giants. And they're saying, well, hold on. There's not just tall white giants that are the accounts. There's a whole variety.
Right.
They want to get hung up on the race of what they are.
That's just the facts.
It's something that, it's almost like a weapon. You get hung up on something like that. It's like, oh, I'm just going to call you a racist. I think it's, it's a cop-out. It's too easy.
Too simple of an explanation.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So, where are we at here?
Navajo.
So the legend of the Navajo is that a great giant that used to wander the land. They also say that giants used to live in the Grand Canyon and were 10 to 18 feet tall. Now that's the account of John Kincaid in the 1909 Phoenix Gazette, super famous article.
Oh yeah.
About really strange, almost Egyptian style, giants being found. All kinds of different
Not
tablets
just giants,
and cultures.
but just history and pieces from cultures, Asian cultures. I thought like Viking culture, Middle Eastern culture. Like it was basically like a museum within this cave system in the Grand Canyon.
Yeah. And the Smithsonian showed up there.
Yeah. And it's just like the Indiana Jones movie.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of, was it Raiders of the Lost Ark? get the Ark of the Covenant and they put it in the warehouse, and it's just
the
artifact
guy,
after artifact.
He's wheeling the cart, and it's this big long hallway.
Yeah.
He's just wheeling that cart, and then it just gets put up.
It's just another repository of information that is kept away from people.
I mean, they're digging up artifacts for like 150 years.
Right.
So, some of the things that we talked about, like these copper gorgets and, these strange, like, where are these artifacts? Where are these things? And that's what we're going to get into.
Well, some of it's in museums still, and there are some items that are on display, but as far as actual skeletal remains of giants, I think we're at a crossroads that it's believed that there were skeletal remains, but where they are, who has them, or where they're kept is the point of contention.
Right.
As we go through this episode, you'll see what we're talking about. This next account was from the Smithsonian magazine, and again, sticking with the Native American tribe motif here, we have William Bartram and others recorded local Native American narratives of the mounds. They seemingly corroborated these mythical origins of the mounds. According to Bartram's early journals, Travels, originally published in 1791, the Creek and the Cherokee who lived around mounds and attributed their construction to the ancients, many ages prior to their arrival and possessing of this country. So there is an account from the Native Americans stating it was from a different group of people before they came into kind of, I don't want to say ownership of the land, but inhabitation of the land. They're giving that credit and that nod to a group of someone else. Bartram's account of Creek and Cherokee histories led to the view that these Native Americans were colonizers just like Euro-Americans. So just as Columbus came over, and then once we came over and started establishing new colonies and the states of the USA, the Native Americans did much something similar. So they're coming in, and that's how they talk about Egypt as well, that maybe Egypt wasn't all built by the Egyptians and all the... So it seems like there's a lot of times it's kind of like renting a place or buying a house. You move in there and you think, wow, this is brand new to me. Yeah. But it has a whole history to it.
Yeah. Somebody lived there before you.
Multiple lives through that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this served as one more way to justify the removal of Native Americans from their ancestral lands. If Native Americans were colonizers too, the logic went, then white Americans had just as much right to the land as indigenous people. The creation of the myth of the mounds parallels early American expansionist practices, like the state-sanctioned removal of native peoples from their ancestral lands to make way for the movement of new Americans into the western frontier. Part of this forced removal included the erasure of Native American ties to their cultural landscapes. So that's why, again, we were talking about it here earlier in Columbus in general. We have mounds all over the place, and there's reference to mounds, but you don't see a lot of them. Like Mound Street downtown.
They're all gone.
Right.
That was a huge conical mound.
Right.
That was, I think, 30 or 40 feet tall. Mound Street, right down, the river. We had this confluence of the Scioto and Olentangy River.
Right.
There were crazy amounts of half-moon henges, astronomical earthworks as well on each side of the river, both on the Scioto and Olentangy, stretching all the way down to Marietta and Portsmouth, where you still can find really interesting astronomical earthworks all the way down the Scioto River that empties into the Ohio River. So really, really interesting.
Yeah.
How many? There were, I think, 10,000 earthworks in mounds in Ohio. Now we only have about 1,000 left that are visible.
So go check those out if you guys have a chance. They're pretty cool.
They're amazing. And they're all in nature, so I mean, a lot of them have nature trails, and you go on a hike. There's some biking in some areas.
Some of them have events.
It's just a cool day trip. If you want to shoot photos and go hang out somewhere cool, it's some of them have little museums you can check out.
Yeah, the Serpent Mound event we were bummed got canceled this year.
Yeah, this spring.
Yeah, that would have been nice.
Spring equinox.
Yeah, so some of the places actually have events that occur with.
Yep.
What is it? Astrological.
Yep. Shout out to Alternate Universe Rock Shop. They were going to be putting on that event, Terry and Tom. And so we were kind of bummed out. but there may be something on the horizon.
Yeah,
with
that would be cool.
With the folks from the alternate universe rock shop and the Strange Road, yet to come.
Yeah, this is another one I like here. The next account that we have is another early recorded mention of them. We'll say them. Appears to be the other giants or the other civilization or whoever else that the Native Americans were kind of giving back to these early historians. But Benjamin Smith Barton's 1797 book, New Views of the Origin of the Tribes and Nations of America, citing the authority of Colonel Leonard Marbury, Barton wrote that the Cherokee tell us that when they first arrived in the country which they inhabit, they found it possessed by certain moon-eyed people who could not see in the daytime. These wretches they expelled. So, yeah, I hate to say it sounds a lot like what happened to the Native Americans as we know it happened to the previous inhabitants of the Native Americans in a certain way.
Human beings are conquerors. If they want your land, a stronger tribe, a stronger army.
Right.
Whether it's Rome, whether it's, in ancient Britain or China, Egypt, it's you're going to have cultures that are going to clash. If they run out of resources, they're going to move into a new area, and that cycle's just going to keep repeating. So
if that's what was going on, and now let's say let's use the allegorical giants as the global giants, the world power giants. We'll use that in the different sense. Like, we're not physically giants, but you have the biggest military, you have the biggest naval, air force, what have you. That is now the giant that is taking over in that way of, hey, we're going to take your culture over. But when it was actual physical people, it was giants taking over from other giants, it seems like, because these Native American tribes were even described as giants. But then they're talking about even bigger giants.
Yep.
So it seems like this apex retakeover that now that we have society, and again, just a thought on it, like, well, you can't really keep regrowing these giants.
Right.
Because we don't work in that manner anymore. We work in a different fashion. Like, our bodies aren't necessarily as important as they used to be.
Right.
Our minds and our intellect are becoming much, much more useful and much more needed and a necessity, unless you're getting into a street fight or something.
Yeah.
Then maybe you want to kind of, be able to handle yourself. But
exactly.
That's just really interesting that there's this uprooting of each previous owner or inhabitant by someone else.
Yeah.
And then in another account in 1902, Myths of the Cherokee, ethnographer James Mooney described a dim but persistent tradition of ancient people who preceded the Cherokee in lower Appalachia and were driven out by them. Accounts often describe them as having white skin and credit them with building the ancient structures in the area.
So that's coming from the Cherokee. And again, the academics will say, these guys are writing this, some of these folks are writing this to
discredit the Native American.
Native Americans. So this is why this subject is so controversial, because each side calls the other racist, and there's all this kind of back and forth between these camps.
Well, and it's a very effective weapon, like you said.
We've started kind of getting around some of these circles, and it's just, for me, it's hilarious because we want to go and check out everything and go to all these different events, and we're absolutely not taking anyone's side. I will go see Dr. Lepper. I've seen him talk numerous times. Haven't met him yet, but he gives fantastic lectures. And so, I'll go and see, Jeffrey Wilson talk, Ross Hamilton talk. I haven't seen Jim Vieira or Hugh Newman or any of those guys talk, but I've heard them on podcasts and they're great.
Right.
And to say that Jim Vieira and, Sarah Farmer and Jason Jarrell and these guys, I mean, these books are huge.
Yeah.
There's
they're not
tons of information in these books, and there's tons of sites. Everything's cited, where some of the sites in Giants on Record comes from the Smithsonian magazine, or from the Smithsonian their own website.
Right.
So, there's accounts of the Smithsonian field journals where the Smithsonian Institute is writing about finding giant skeletons, different institutions and colleges. And so they're documenting it to then come out later, getting a little bit ahead of ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. You're good.
Sorry. Going on a rant. I had to stop myself. Whoa, that was close. I almost
hold back.
Yeah.
Hold back on the giant.
All right.
So we, the next part
this is my favorite. This might be my favorite part
Yeah.
of the episode. Giant accounts in town halls, newspaper articles, writings like the American Antiquarian and Oriental Journal. There's town halls, press. And so this is the cover of the American Antiquarian Oriental Journal, Volume 9, Thanks Stone. We found this, like I said, free on Google Books, and amazing sketches of some of these sites and earthworks, like really early sketches of these geometric, interesting sites that you find all over the place. And these guys were on the ground documenting all this stuff, doing surveys, digging up mounds, finding bones, finding artifacts. This is from the volume 9, and this is from page 176, and this is written by Pizarro Cook, and it's 1864 in Lennoxville, Crawford County, Wisconsin. This is the west bank of the Kickapoo River.
All right.
In a land called Kickapoo.
Yeah, Jack Black.
The skeleton, there was a skeleton of a giant that was exhumed. It was 14 feet below the surface, 8'2" in length.
That's a center.
That's a big one.
Or really talented forward.
And so there were bear claw necklaces found, a lynx pipe found.
A lot of pipes.
Yeah. So, these workmen, they're digging up these mounds, and they're all over the place. And so this is just one of the accounts. The pipe bowl was finely wrought into a figure of an animal, apparently a lynx. There were 2 layers of human bones above him. The first, some 4 feet below the surface. The next layer, some 8 feet below the surface. This shows that very long period of time must have elapsed, and my tablet just freaked out. And so the giant was entered, and we have no reason to suppose that the giant was buried at first 14 feet below the surface. I have this theory about the internment that he was buried. So these guys are writing about it's really cool. They have their own theories. They're really trying to figure out who this mound builder culture was. And they kind of write openly before a lot of this information starts to kind of get tightly controlled in a way.
Right.
Once the institution of the Smithsonian and some of these institutions get established.
Right.
And so this is kind of before these antiquarian journals were kind of before all that.
Right.
And then we have another image here, the antiquarian, and this is again on page 176 as well. And this is 6 miles below the mouth of the Suquehallie River. And one of the agents or employees of the Smithsonian Institute at D.C. exhumed the remains of another skeleton at a size which was calculated to be about 9 foot in length.
That's
so
a giant.
You got the Smithsonian out there.
That's a giant.
Being on site.
Yeah.
This guy is reporting.
Yeah.
The Smithsonian is there. And, they find a copper breastplate or the copper gorgets and a large hatchet. So that's right there in this American Antiquarian. And then page 176, there's a third account, and that's 3 miles northeast of where the first giant remains were found. And it was a huge man lying on his back. The limbs, head, and were all in perfect form. And this figure was about 8 rods in length, found with a polished bird sculpture. So these are just 3 accounts that I found. There are others. Just wanted to kind of present. It's not just newspaper articles and town halls. These are people from universities. You see the Carnegie Museum popping up in these antiquarian journals. Like, you got some pretty legit guys. This is, again, before archaeology starts, is really, truly established.
Right.
And so very cool. And so here's some newspaper articles we're going to go through. And we're going to start with, there's giant skeletons found in a cave in New Mexico. The one in Mexico was found by Charles C. Clapp, and Thomas W. Lawson's mining interest had called the attention of this professor and this Professor Gazis, and they found 200 skeletons.
This is nuts.
Okay, and some of the men were above 8 feet in height.
That's a lot.
And so what he says is this is the burial place of a race of giants who who antedated the Aztecs. So they're saying that they believe that these giants were a culture that predates the Aztecs.
That's kind of interesting.
And the femur reached up to this guy's thigh.
That's a big leg. Just one part.
And he says the molars were big enough to crack a coconut. So the teeth are always in perfect condition in some of these accounts. And then here, there's one really cool one in New Mexico. And the archaeologists send an expedition to explore graveyards in New Mexico where bodies are unearthed. And this is, by the way, both of these are New York Times articles. So New York Times has always been highly regarded. Now I'm not so sure these days. But they've always been highly regarded and respected journalism.
Right.
So there's a ton of New York Times. I mean, you can go for $1 a month and get a subscription to New York Times, and you have the full archive of every single newspaper going way back to the 1800s.
Right.
And so that's where we found these.
Right.
I signed up for the New York Times archive. And so these are from their own website. You just do a quick search, giant skeletons, and you start finding these reports.
1902. 1908.
And so there's a race of giants that were discovered near Guadalupe, New Mexico. Antiquarians and archaeologists are preparing an expedition further to explore that region. This determination is based on the excitement that exists among the people of a scope of the peoples of scope of country near Mesa Rico, about 200 miles southeast of Las Vegas, where an old burial ground has been discovered that has yielded skeletons of enormous size. Luciana Quintana, on whose ranch the ancient burial plot is located, discovered 2 stones that bore curious inscriptions, and beneath these bones of a frame that could not have been less than 12 feet in length, the men who opened the grave say the forearm was 4 feet long.
Sweet Jesus.
And that it ranged, and that it was well-preserved jaw, and the lower teeth ranged from the size of a hickory nut to that of a large walnut in size.
That's a big tooth.
So
you can crack a coconut with that. You can definitely crack a coconut with that.
Yeah, no doubt. So it kind of goes on. It kind of goes on there, and they talk about a little bit more detail. But that was 1902.
That's insane.
So, I mean, even in the 1900s still. I mean, there's some, the Dover Mound, our Jeffrey Wilson, he was on the call with us, and he was lucky enough to take some time and talk to us, and he talked to us about the Dover Mound, and that's something he's been kind of digging into. And you're not going to find that in any of these books.
No.
So when we have Jeffrey Wilson on, we'll have him share some of that for us. But and those are like modern day. When I say modern day, like 60s, 70s. So,
what do you mean?
A little bit more current.
They were just
actually discovered, and dug up. So there's accounts in more modern times. This isn't just the late 1800s, early 1900s.
But there's hurdles to doing that. You can't. I don't know if you can dig up these mounds now.
It's on private property.
You can if it's on private property.
I guess wherever this was in the 60s and 70s,
those
laws were not in place yet.
That makes sense.
So the
NAGPRA
Act, the repatriation, basically they, a lot of the bones that were dug up, were sent back to tribes. In the 1990s, this law was passed.
Yeah, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990.
Yeah, which, all these museums.
Fairly recent.
And people, all over. There's museums in England that have bones of our ancient tribes in America. And so they're all over the place.
They did a Magellan.
They were pulling these things out, digging them up. And so with that law, they had to ship all, I mean, who knows if the bones made it to the right tribe? I don't know what they did. So one of the biggest thing is that there are no bones.
That we know of.
There might be a place where I believe there's some place in Pennsylvania where you can go and there's a skeleton of a fairly large skeleton that you can still go and see. And I think that was Giants on Record. But they used to be on display in different museums.
Right.
In a lot of different places.
Right. In a lot of museums.
But they had to take them down. But that's like, it's kind of whack. Really? It'd be like in 150 years or, 1,000 years, somebody's going to dig up one of your relatives and put them in a museum and like your grandma's on display. That's
she deserves
horrific, so
she'd make a good display.
It's a good thing that those bones were, returned and reburied properly with honor. And, but again, there's no evidence of the bones. They're gone. So
that we know of.
Well, sure. I mean, there could be private collections somewhere, or.
I mean, that's how we get established history of something too, though. I mean, I don't want to be insensitive to the fact that, but like if we didn't dig up dinosaur bones, we wouldn't know about dinosaurs. Like, it's kind of like having stuff that you put in a box as a kid, and you forget about it, and you put it somewhere, and then years later you find it and pull those things out and kind of refresh your memory on it. But I mean, yeah, I'm not saying dig up every skeletal remain or every mound, but that kind of is difficult to establish the history predating the Native Americans if we don't know who they were or have any kind of data on them. That's what makes this subject in general one of the more tough ones. Like in other instances,
you say the wrong thing, you seem insensitive.
I know, that's what I'm saying, and I don't mean that, but like if we're trying to study Sasquatch or UFOs or
just have an open mind. It's okay.
Yeah.
We can talk about things for
a
great conversation. Like we're not trying to convince you that they're these giant skeletons were buried. Like I could care less. It's just a cool thing to talk about. It's like, holy shit.
It's more the fact that there was so much of it going on that it generated all of this data in this format. And then again, in a certain way, the collected data was repatriated to these tribes.
Right.
And then, either, I don't know, misplaced, reburied, what happened. But again, it's more of just, the conversation of how do we establish this really happened?
And maybe one day there'll be somebody that comes out and says, it's all real, man. Just like UFOs 4 days ago when the Pentagon released those videos that were taken from aircraft from our own government and essentially telling us that, hey, UFOs are real. I mean, did that just happen? That did happen, right?
Yeah.
So one day maybe they'll come out and say, hey, these giant skeletons, it was all real. We're just messing with you for the last 150 years.
They could.
So this is a cool, the one we were kind of dropped with we actually have the article of the 9-foot sword we were talking about. Oh. And that's the newspaper article, Cardiff Giant Undone with an Enormous Iron Helmet, Daily Evening Bulletin, January 4th, 1870, originally written by the Oil City Times, which is probably just some local or, some oil company's newspaper that is, everybody that works for them gets updates. And so this was republished by the Ohio Democrat, the Philly newspaper, the Daily Evening Bulletin, pretty reputable paper back in the day from what I understand.
Okay.
I found this article actually from the Daily Evening Bulletin's archive, and that's where our image is from. And so this oil derrick's getting dug up, and boom, they hit this huge iron helmet. Iron helmet, not copper. Iron work. That's not supposed to be a thing in Ohio. I mean, is there supposed to be that advanced metallurgy? according to what I learned in school.
Not at that time.
That was, in only happening in Europe and the Middle East in the Iron Age. So further digging, they find this 9 foot tall, 9 foot in length, huge iron sword with it. And it's really easy to find these articles. And if you want to, there's the one for reference, but if you want to go check it out yourself, it's super easy to find. They discovered 2 enormous feet. In a few hours, they unearthed a well-preserved remains of an enormous giant belonging to a species of the human family, which probably inhabited this and other parts of the world at that time which the Bible speaks, when it says, "And there were giants in those days." So they're getting a little quote from the Old Testament, which we talked about earlier. And the relics have been taken to Tia Nesta, where they are visited by large numbers of people. You see that too, where they'll actually put these bones and artifacts on display, and the whole town shows up, and they all get to see it.
Right.
And they're just walking through. It's just like a normal kind of thing.
Well, activities.
The Miamisburg Mound, I think we have from that too, but that was another situation where they had things on display in Miamisburg, Ohio, where the locals all talked about, and the local newspaper, the Dayton Daily News, wrote up, this thing being on display, the skeleton being on display, and so that giant would have stood 18 feet tall.
That's the 18-foot.
That's the 18-footer, 9 foot tall sword, huge iron helmet.
It's a big.
That one really sticks out. Now, this is a pretty famous one. This is the Serpent Mound. This is Giants of Other Days. And it's the headline is "Recent Discovery Near Serpent Mound, Ohio," from the Indianapolis Journal. Farmer Warren Cohen of Hillsboro, Ohio, while fox hunting, recently discovered several ancient graves. They were situated upon a high point of land in Highland County, Ohio, about a mile from the famous Serpent Mound, where Professor Putnam of Harvard made an interesting discovery. As soon as the weather permitted, Cohen excavated several of these graves. The graves were made of a large limestone slabs. That's interesting. There's some stonework. 2.5 to 3 feet in length and a foot wide. These were set on the edge about a foot apart. Similar slabs covered the graves. And so what they talk about, I believe, and the skeleton was just over 6 feet tall, which to me, not so huge. So that's kind of one of these stories again where it's the giants. It's this, and it's the New York Times. It's a bit sensational, I think.
For a 6 foot tall, yeah.
Yeah, 6.5 feet tall. So it's one of those that's, sort of sensationalized, I feel. But it was just kind of interesting to find that one. And then there's another account, the Serpent Mound. There was this old postcard that Jeffrey Wilson had come across from the Peabody Museum.
Yeah.
And that was all artifacts and different things that were documented from this Professor Putnam. And so Putnam, he did a dig on Serpent Mound in the late 1800s, and he's actually the guy that rebuilt it. And so what you see at Serpent Mound now,
he rebuilt it?
That's the reconstruction from Putnam in the late 1800s. So it used to look a lot different. There were horns. It was like a horned serpent, which there were burials in the edge of the horns.
Huh.
And so when he rebuilt it, he kind of did a somewhat of a crappy job. There's, some people say that he was like wasted, pretty much drinking like gallons of whiskey, and it was like a frat party out there. And so, he was like the nephew of one of the dudes at Harvard, and they let him go ahead and
do whatever he
dig
wanted.
up Serpent Mound. And
wow.
So, there probably wasn't a lot of best practices in place back then either. So
quality control.
Some of these guys, they dig up these mounds and then they just do a horrible job, and the data is just ruined forever. So there's no way that we're ever going to be able to carbon date anything,
because they weren't archaeologists. They were just more, I hate to say it, like grave robbers.
Yeah.
They were just looking. It was like finding a scratch off lottery ticket. Like, what's in here? Can I get maybe something of value?
Right.
Or, in that sense, it's more of like a honeypot to them. Like it seems like they were just trying to get something out of it rather than actually document it in an archaeological, historical manner.
Yeah.
Which is sad.
And so we have a clip from Jeffrey Wilson. We shot this interview like in 2018, and we have a clip from Jeffrey talking about this, a couple other things, but he is going to mention this postcard. And so a lot of these giant books all have this image, and this is Jeffrey's research. So there's shout outs in most of these books when they're talking about this specific postcard. Yeah. Which is really cool. And so we have that clip to roll.
I uncovered a historical postcard that was printed around the turn of the century that was a duplicate of a glass slide photo that the Peabody Museum took during their excavations here. And it was of the skeleton that had his legs cut off at the knees and his hands cut off. And the caption on the postcard was, "Skeleton 7 feet in length, found in the mound." Once I uncovered that postcard, Ross Hamilton used it in one of his books, and from there, in one of his books on the giants, it has caught like wildfire across the giants world and appeared in all kinds of publications about giants and stuff like that. But here's the thing. All we have is that caption. We don't really know how big that skeleton was. So when I started this project about going to the Peabody and uncovering all of the artifacts and all of the glass plate photos that they had taken, I got all the excavation photos, including that one of the guy cut off at the knees. And the problem with examining that photo is there is nothing in the photo that you can use to scale, right? You can't, there's no artifacts next to them that you could measure, that you could then say, okay, that's how big this guy is. All we know is that ostensibly the guy was 7 feet. What does that mean? He's 7 feet from his knees to the top of his head, in which case he's taller than 8 feet? Or were they trying to estimate the, how big he was, the missing portion? We don't know, right? It's just sort of a mystery. But there was a skeleton, the main burial in the mound, which is another Adena burial, that was laid out on the bed of ashes. That's the slide that you're referring to. And there are actually two photographs of that burial, one from the left side, one from the right side. And in both photographs, there are artifacts next to the skeleton, next to the human remains, that you can scale. And I hunted those artifacts down in the Peabody archives that have the scale measurements with the photograph of the artifact. And so it's a really simple thing. You can measure the artifact on the screen. I used a program called Screen Calipers that measures the pixels. And then you measure not just the artifact, you can measure the skeleton. They have, it's basically a perpendicular measurement, photograph of the skeleton, one from the left side, one from the right side. And I measured from the top of the skull to the ankle. I didn't include the feet. I only went right to the top of the ankle. So from the top of the head to the ankle, you get a measurement. Screen calipers make that measurement. You have the measurement of the artifact. Then you know the true measurement of the artifact. You know how big it is in inches or in centimeters. And then it's just a simple algebra equation. Solve for X. How big is the skeleton? And it turns out that skeleton in there, the big one that has, all the parts to the skeleton, was 8 feet 9 inches tall. Okay, now, that's much bigger than the 7 foot report. So it may be that the other skeleton really was 7 feet. We don't know. Since that time, I found 2 other pieces of evidence that lend some support to that. One was I came across a newspaper article written before 1910, where a group of schoolgirls came to Serpent Mound for a visit, and they were given a tour by the caretaker of the mound. His name was Wallace. And Wallace was here at Serpent Mound and helped on the dig when the Peabody did their excavations between 1886 and 1889. And after 1889, he was subsequently hired to be the caretaker of the site. So he was here through the 1890s, and then when the Ohio Historical Society received the site ownership from Harvard, Ohio Historical Society hired him to be the caretaker, and he was the caretaker here until 1914 when he died during World War I. So this is somewhere around 1910. Gets these visitor schoolgirls that come here, and this gets reported in the Portsmouth newspaper. And in there, they talk about that the caretaker reported to these girls, remember this is like 1910, that when he was here, they had excavated a skeleton out of the large conical mound that was bigger than 7 feet tall. So it's not just some wild story. We have an eyewitness to it who was here during the excavations, helped in the excavations, reporting that. And that was reported in the newspaper. Right? We also have a story that appeared in the New York Times in 1894-95. There was an excavation that was done 1 mile north of Serpent Mound across into Highland County, just across the Highland County, Adams County line. And this farmer had several mounds on his property. They were excavated, and he found several burials of people who were taller than 7 feet. So this is, there were people in and around this area that were at least that tall that were being buried in these mounds. And so that's what we know at this point. What I do know is that once that story came out and then spread like wildfire, and all of the nonsense that's been talked about that original postcard, is that Brad Lepper wanted to put the kibosh on all of that. And so he contacted the Peabody and asked them to make a measurement of the femur of the skeleton in the mound. And there are these anthropological methods that can extrapolate the height of the person based on the size of the femur. And so he got a measurement from them, and he then did the extrapolation. He said the person wasn't taller than 6 feet. But here's the issue. I asked them which skeleton did they make the measurement from. They didn't tell him. There were at least 10 skeletons that came out of the mound. So we have this vague measurement of a femur of one of the 10 skeletons that came out of the mound, and it turns out that person was 6 feet tall, roughly. So we don't really know at this point whether we can confirm the 8 feet 9 inches. We just can do that based on screen measurements. But that's as far as we can tell at this point. Jason Gerald and Sarah Farmer's book, Ages of the Giants, they go into quite amount of detail as to the possible motive for why that cover-up happened. And they talk about how most of the people that were involved in the Smithsonian and a number of the other major institutions, they were all members of the American Eugenics Society. The American Eugenics Society was a society that was put forward that basically was white people are at the top of the evolutionary scale. And evidence for people who may have been of greater stature, who may have been as brilliant, if not more brilliant than us today, evidence for that was frowned upon, right? That was why the cover-up happened, was because at the time in the 1860s and 70s and 80s, when the Smithsonian was going around digging up mounds and finding these tall stature people, the federal government was still engaging in warfare against Native American tribes, particularly in the near western states. And so they had to have some justification for those wars to seize those people's land, to embark upon that genocide. And the archaeological finding of these people's prehistoric ancestors were maybe evolutionary, maybe a step above us, that really, puts the federal government in a precarious position. And so that's, I think, maybe why the cover-up may have occurred. Or at least, yeah, that whole idea.
Also Darwinism?
Scientific Darwinism, social Darwinism played a big role. Those are all tenets of the American Eugenics Society. And you look at John Wesley Powell, he was a member. You look at all of the major key figures in those, they were all members. So they were rounding up the skeletons and sending them to the Smithsonian, and they were doing those, sort of racial studies of, the cranium capacity of people and making social judgments about the intelligence level of people based on their cranial capacity, which is totally bogus. But those are all these sort of racial arguments that were, coming to the fore. And remember, this is all in the aftermath of the Civil War, and so there's a lot of this social racial animosity that's taking place in Jim Crow laws are being passed and all that kind of nonsense. So, it's part of the dark chapters of, American history that took place. And we're just beginning to come out of it, right? We're just beginning to find this stuff over, in the last few years, and now beginning to start making some sense of it.
So that was a clip from Jeffrey Wilson.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Yeah, that was cool. That was really fun that day, capturing that interview. That was DP TJ Boster. You can follow him at TJ Boster on Instagram.
What up, TJ?
And our boy Sam Thompson,
Full gram.
helping us out with the audio on that one. And my boy Christopher Aisa was helping out that day. Fun day at Serpent Mound with Jeffrey Wilson. So we have a couple accounts that we got from Giants on Record, Jim and Hughes' book, and a skeleton in armor, Wichita Daily News. Wichita Daily Eagle, November 17th, 1891. And then the Daily Newburgh Journal, October 26th. American, 7 foot tall, 1898. Liberty Earthworks Southeast. That was in Liberty Earthworks Southeast Chillicothe.
Yeah.
And then this is an interesting one. The Miamisburg Mound, Montgomery County, Ohio. This was built by the Adena. It's 1000 BC to 2000 BC. So a pretty ancient mound there in Miamisburg. I've been to that one. It's huge.
I don't think I've been there.
And you can climb up it. There's steps. And you can actually climb up to the top, and you can see over the whole valley of the Little or Big Miami River. And it's beautiful. And that's the largest conical mound in Ohio. It used to be almost 7 feet tall. This is from the Middletown Signal, January 17th, 1899, with the headline, Bones of Prehistoric Giant Found Near Miamisburg. The skeleton of a giant found near Miamisburg is the cause of much discussion, not only among the curious and illiterate, but among the learned scientists of the world. The body of a man more gigantic than ever recorded in human history has been found in the Miami Valley, Ohio.
Shout out Ohio.
The skeleton, it is calculated, must have belonged to a man 8 foot 1.5 inches in height. Professor Thomas Wilson, who's the curator of prehistoric anthropology at the Smithsonian Institute, said the following after examining the find.
The authenticity of the skull is beyond any doubt. Its antiquity unquestionably great. To my own personal knowledge, several such crania were discovered in the Hopo group of mounds in Ohio. The jaws were prognathous, which means projecting beyond the face, and the facial index remarkably low. That's the Smithsonian's boy. I mean, he's the curator of prehistoric anthropology. So this is his wheelhouse. He knows what he's talking about. That's why he writes, the authenticity is beyond any doubt.
Remember 2 weeks ago when I was freaking out about not being able to find this account?
This is the one?
Yeah, this is the one I was from Miamisburg.
That's hilarious.
Because I'd read that years ago that there was a Smithsonian field journal, and this guy from the Smithsonian was there and had written about the Miamisburg Mound, this account.
Right.
And then we found it in Jim Vieira's book, and page 103. This is from the Miamisburg Public Library. The Historical Collections of Ohio.
Yeah, in 1848.
Mm-hmm.
The day they opened the Miamisburg Mound. Dayton Daily News, February 23rd, 1932. 8 feet below the surface came upon a human skeleton entombed in a sitting posture facing due east. So this is your guy facing in a certain direction.
Mm-hmm.
Is that random? Is that deliberate? It seems like you would, if it is in fact specifically due east, maybe you have a shot of doing that by accident, but for the most part, it seems like that was probably pretty purposeful. But inside the mound, there was also wood, stone, charcoal, and ashes, and a carefully preserved human, which was of unusual size. A term I would use, I guess you could use that in the sense if they thought they were unusually small or big, but in this instance, we're talking unusually big.
Yeah.
The next one I want you to go over because I think this one's awesome.
Yeah, this is a gigantic man buried next to a ferocious panther.
Love that.
The Cincinnati Commercial Gazette, September 26, 1889. Relics were collected to be placed on loan at the Smithsonian.
There they are again.
11.
There they are again.
11.
Just wait. You're going to be up to your knees and then to your chest and neck in Smithsonian. That's why this is so interesting, because they are such a. You say Smithsonian Institute, people know what you're talking about.
Museums, and they've been,
Well, and even in an esoteric way, they have knowledge. They have this collected history.
Yeah.
And people are familiar with the Smithsonian name.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, go ahead. So the Smithsonian pops up again here.
So this Cincinnati Commercial Gazette, 11 mounds were opened up in, I guess, over this period of time.
Okay.
And the mounds were composed of clay again, sand again, burnt charcoal.
So a lot of repeating motifs from mound to mound or building style.
Yeah. Some of the layers seemed painted.
That part interests me.
Yeah.
That's another step of really dedicated, preserved burial rituals.
Yeah.
You're going to paint that.
Yeah.
Wonder what they were using to make paint. And that they could
Plants.
tell it was preserved that much later on. But yeah, also inside there, skeleton of a large individual. And this part, bones of a panther next to the giant. And they actually were like, was this a pet panther? Or did he kill the panther?
Yeah.
And bury it with him like some kind of trophy?
It could have been maybe like his house cat,
If he's that large.
Big giant, he's going to have a panther as a pet. I'm leaning towards that because that's way more fun. That's way more fun.
Panther as a pet.
Yeah.
Pet panther.
I'm going with pet panther.
I like pet panther.
I don't think he killed the giant. I think the giant would have taken care of him.
Well, they were saying, did the giant kill the panther?
Right. No, I think they were buddies.
But so who died first, the panther or the giant?
Maybe they were in battle or something. Who knows? But that's from the Cincinnati Commercial
This makes me
Gazette.
think of He-Man riding around on
Battle Cat. So the Cardiff Giant we talked a little bit about.
Yeah.
Basically the most well-known hoax, proven to be hoax.
And Jim Vieira researched that to basically put it on its head and say it probably wasn't real. And that's what we were talking about earlier. There's fakes, there's forgeries. But you're going to have that. You're going to have there's fakes and forgeries and everything. Look at Milli Vanilli.
Yeah. Pop music from the 90s.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just forgeries. There's a lot of lip syncing going on in all kinds of facets.
In archaeology, for sure.
People want to make a name for themselves.
Yeah, you want to get on those headlines. There's no social media. There's just newspapers.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So they're trying to get that New York Times article.
Right.
So, you know, guys like P.T. Barnum, they're just making bank.
Right.
Off fake giants. You know?
Oh.
So the history of Coshocton County, Ohio, its past, present, and future. A. Graham, a company, Newark, Ohio, in 1840, near Plainfield, J.D. Workman opened a small mound. Another mound about 2 miles below was excavated some 10 years later by Wesley Patrick. They found jawbone, skull, and thigh of unusually large size, indicated the skeleton would be fully 7 foot in length.
Yep.
So these are like town hall accounts or town history accounts. So, you know, you have your local historian in Coshocton County.
Like the minutes from a meeting at a council meeting.
So this isn't a newspaper article.
Right.
But it's this town hall or, you know, city historical account.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of different varieties of some of these documentations that you see. And the argument is that, you know, they're written to sell papers and books and they're highlighted. That's kind of the academic stance on
trying to generate a headline.
Why do you see these articles and things that are written in the newspapers? Is, you know, they're being sensationalized to, you know, sell newspapers.
The National Enquirer.
But, so the North Benton Mound, this is interesting. Really, this is up in Mahoning County, northeastern Ohio, 7 feet in diameter.
75 feet.
75 feet in diameter, 7.5 feet high. And this is in 1839. This guy, Willis McGrath and Roy Saltzman. In the eastern part of the mound, there's this eagle effigy. And so inside this one mound, there's all these different intricate, there's an altar in there.
Yeah.
There's different shapes, like these mosaic shapes, and then different skeletons that are buried throughout the mound. And then there's a thunderbird that's in a mosaic.
That's big.
And on the north wing, there is, they talk about a giant being recovered from basically the north wing of this thunderbird motif or effigy.
Right.
And so, and then I think there was on the south side, they found another skeleton there as well. So all over the place, a lot of different types of accounts, different types of earthworks that they're being found in.
Right.
And then we get to the Smithsonian.
Yeah. And we get to
so go ahead.
We get to Ross Hamilton, and like you said earlier, Ross Hamilton is the OG of the Giants. Been on this track for quite some time, it seems like, and very well written on the matter as well, especially with a lot of other researchers. You know, again, kind of referencing back to quite a bit of Ross's material, but from a tradition of giants, we have this part from Ross, and that goes. A large Indian mound has recently been opened and examined by a committee of scientists sent out from the Smithsonian Institute. At some depth from the surface, a kind of vault was found in which was discovered the skeleton of a giant measuring 7 feet 2 inches. His hair was coarse and jet black and hung to the waist, the brow being ornamented with a copper crown. The skeleton was remarkably well preserved and taken from the vault intact. On the stones which covered the vault were carved inscriptions, and these, when deciphered, will doubtless lift the veil that now shrouds the history of the race of people that one time inhabited this part of the American continent. The relics have been carefully packed and forwarded to the Smithsonian Institute, and they are said to be the most interesting collection ever found in the United States. That's a big statement. And this is, again, the Smithsonian. I'm kind of going to harp on it, right? Because what is the Smithsonian? Do people know? Do you know where the Smithsonian came from? Because I didn't before I started researching it.
It's a group of research museums, research centers, and it's basically all administered by the U.S. government.
Yeah.
Founded in 1846, and it was basically to just increase the diffusion of knowledge. That was their slogan.
Auspiciously as the diffusion of knowledge.
Right.
Seems like not so much.
Right.
I like the guy it's named after and its founding donor because it's named after a British scientist, James Smithson.
Yeah.
But he never even came to the U.S.
He never
set foot here.
Never visited the U.S.
Not once.
Had this institute that
Right.
he, established, created.
Yeah.
And
It's called the Nation's Attic for its eclectic holdings of 154 million items. Has 19 museums, 21 libraries, 9 research centers, and a zoo. We don't know if Sasquatch is there. Mostly located in the District of Columbia. They have over 200 institutions and museums in 45 states. Puerto Rico and Panama are Smithsonian affiliates. The original endowment or donation from James Smithson was purportedly 105 sacks containing 104,960 gold sovereigns, which equaled $500,000 roughly at the time of donation, but today would equivalent out to something like 13 million on the last estimate I've seen online. And even funnier, the money was originally invested by the U.S. Treasury in bonds issued by the state of Arkansas, which soon defaulted.
yeah,
And
they lost all the money.
yeah, so they get this endowment and they gamble it and they lose it. So it took some convincing from former President John Quincy Adams to persuade Congress to restore the funds with interest.
Yeah.
So they did make good on that. And then after the money was actually there was kind of some debate on what the institution should be. Like,
Yeah.
what is its identity, kind of what's its mission statement.
They wanted to develop the U.S., the national identity.
That's per the
Through-
Smithsonian website.
Yes.
That was their
exactly.
agenda, to
Yeah.
aid in the process or become part of the process of developing the U.S. national identity.
Right.
What does that mean? That seems to
It's up
mean
for debate.
exactly what we have read about is that, again, that kind of friendly takeover in this instance, or I guess more friendly than just all-out battle and war, which we did a lot of that and then just took over. But so, yeah, it's trying to develop that PR story of how we became to be.
Yeah.
The newly founded Bureau of Ethnology drove an agenda of manifest destiny and the new theory of evolution, according to Jim Vieira and all other authors.
A lot of these guys talk about that.
Yeah, and here's one of the sketchiest parts. The Smithsonian Institute is neither governmental or private. So it's kind of in this gray area. It's run by a trust.
Right.
So it's kind of like they have jurisdiction, but they have no oversight.
Yeah.
Which
they kind
is
of just
Wild West.
yeah, it's a gray area.
Next, we have these awesome images from Squire and Davis.
Yeah, these are so cool.
The first one we have is Serpent Mound, and again, that is very nearby or close enough that we've been to it a couple of times, and it's a really interesting mound because it's situated up on like a peninsular bluff, like it drops off of those edges, so it's in this really kind of amazing vantage point from up on that hill to have that
Sits
mound
above
on top of it
a
as
crater,
well. Yeah,
an ancient crater.
it's a really cool
And,
spot.
There's a lot of strange weather patterns that crater generates. Strange
kind of energy?
weather patterns. Maybe. I don't know.
So maybe something of it.
I'm not sure if you can really prove that, but
Yeah.
there's definitely some strange electrical activity for sure, storm wise.
Right on.
And Squire and Davis were two guys from Chillicothe. They're the guys that sketched this image that you guys see here, and they wrote a book in 1848, and it's Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, and they just went all over the country, through the river systems. Spent a lot of time here in Ohio. Obviously, being from Chillicothe, they documented many sites, and they didn't mention giants, but they did conclude that the prehistoric race, there was a superior race that was more advanced than the modern day Native Americans, and basically that they were responsible for building the mounds. Later on, I think they changed their position on that.
Okay.
But this is, when they're out there exploring, this is the views that they had then.
Right.
As they're writing this book.
Right.
And this is they're in it. They are like legit Indiana Jones guys.
Yeah. They're out there in the mix. But that view became an issue, right, with the hierarchy of the Smithsonian for decades.
Right, yeah.
And specifically by John Wesley Powell, which we've read a lot about him over the course of studying for this episode, and his kind of role and thought processes he rolled out or kind of tried to enforce. But the lost race theory was popular.
Yeah.
It did not succeed, though, in becoming the new paradigm that the Smithsonian was building. And there we go to calling about the development of the U.S., building the development of it. To this day, the official doctrine, the Powell doctrine, is that the mounds were built by ancestors of the Native Americans, not a lost race.
Yeah.
Kind of an interesting...
And still to this day, that's the...
when you have Squire and Davis going out as, the first guys to do some publications actually about this, and to have their view contradict John Wesley Powell, who then would kind of write the rules on how to report on this stuff, is very...
So who's John Wesley Powell?
He was the U.S. Director of Ethnology in 1879, and he ran the Smithsonian in its early years. He founded the Bureau of American Ethnology in 1879. The study of characteristics of various peoples and the differences in relationships between them is ethnology, and its discipline defined.
And they were pretty much like a storehouse of records. That was one of their main directives, was gathering materials of North American Indians. So they were out there gathering artifacts, and John Wesley Powell was kind of a badass. He lost his arm in the Civil War.
Yeah.
He was a geologist. He went through all the way through the Grand Canyon.
That's crazy.
Was one of the earlier explorers to really kind of get down into the more remote sections of the Grand Canyon.
Right.
And and so he was a famous explorer in his own right and very well accomplished.
Right.
And basically that expedition was like 1879 to 4 years, 4 or 5 years and some people think, and a lot of these guys write about him being a champion of Darwin's theory of evolution.
Right.
That there's this sort of like scientific cabal, if you will, this belief that, these guys are, trying to push their views,
right,
their interests. Some people that were connected with Powell in later years, which we'll talk about, Cyrus Thomas, and then the Herzliya. Yes?
Oh, yeah. We'll definitely talk about both of them. To Powell's own agenda, or maybe it was his agenda, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was the Smithsonian kind of making him do it. Who knows? But he had the Powell Doctrine, which dictated researching and reporting of pre-Columbian settling. But his decree stated basically that no anthropological research should consider any talk of lost tribes henceforth, while also describing natives as uncultured, savage, and lacking signs of higher intellect. Hence, it will be seen that it is illegitimate to use any pictographic matter of a date anterior to the discovery of the continent by Columbus for historic purposes. By this declaration, Powell effectively discarded any and all artifacts containing writing from consideration of historic analysis, and in doing so protected his earlier declaration that any contact with peoples from other portions of the world is plainly illegitimate. Thus, none of the numerous inscriptions and artifacts which clearly attest to the possibility of ancient contact could be considered as evidence which might challenge the isolationist dogma. Some of those artifacts contain evidence of writing which strongly supports the possibility of ancient contact. That is crazy. The example that we have is this out-of-place artifacts that John Wesley Powell talks about. We have the Grave Creek Mound, and we have an image of the Grave Creek tablet, which definitely has inscription on it.
Yeah, I think that was an excerpt from Jim Vieira. I think that was kind of his view that thus none of the numerous, the inscriptions and artifacts. And it's, yeah.
Look at that little Grave Creek tablet, though. it looks like cuneiform or...
Yeah, so some of the out-of-place artifacts that John Wesley Powell's talking about is the Grave Creek tablet. And again, this is a tablet that's deemed a fake. It's been, researched, and I guess, most universities agree that it's another one of these hoaxes.
Okay.
And it's highly controversial, and there's the Grave Creek Mound, which is a really huge mound in Moundsville, West Virginia, just right on the Ohio River, near Wheeling.
Okay.
And so that's where supposedly this tablet was taken from. And the Grave Creek Mound actually has stories of, guess who?
Mothman.
The Mothman.
He's everywhere.
That's right, baby.
He's everywhere.
How did...
Don't visit me, though, Mothman.
And the Men in Black.
Don't scare me.
So the Men in Black have been seen around the Grave Creek Mound. The Mothman's been seen around the Grave Creek Mound.
Those son-of-a-guns are everywhere, too.
We've got this weird tablet being found. So it's highly controversial, but, there's a lot of other things that were found there, too, like these crazy copper bracelets and trinkets and seashells again. 1,700 ivory beads.
I wonder where those came from.
150 pieces of mica jewelry, and there were giants that were found. There's like this queen's tomb, and there's an upper chamber, and she was 7 feet in length, and there was the king was in the lower chamber. So inside there, they have top chamber with the queen, lower chamber is the king.
Okay.
And the
she
king
gets
was
top bunk.
Guess so. And that skeleton, according to this, exceeded 8 feet in length.
I mean,
is the story there?
She's a tall lady, and that's a tall guy. Yeah, there's just account after account. It's just insane. Cyrus Thomas, you mentioned him earlier. In 1882, Cyrus Thomas was appointed the director of Division of Mound Exploration. So this guy was really in the mix. And he's quietly was a believer in the legendary lost race theory. So again, he's referencing back to it. Native Americans talk about it. He was aware of hundreds of reports of giant skeletons, strange artifacts that seemed to be from other lands. Sophisticated geometry, astronomy, and mathematics were being revealed from earthworks regardless of the Smithsonian's involvement. And so he dispatched just research crew after research crew out into the field to investigate the mounds and find out what was going on. And his primary goal, I believe that he actually penned himself, was to make a collection of
skeletons and crania.
Especially crania.
Yeah.
Found in the mounds or the graves. So either let's say this at time
he was a believer of diffusionism as well,
but he had to have been hearing these stories too.
Yeah,
if all these mounds were
his crew was out there all over combing the entire country.
Yeah, but for his prime directive to be the skeleton remains and most importantly the crania.
Yeah,
this guy had a real agenda. He wasn't just like had no clue about what was going on and just bumped into this. So there must have been some kind of chatter going on that he was already aware of this. You know what I mean? But yeah, diffusionism, go and explain that, because pretty easy concept, just the term itself, maybe not a lot of people are familiar with.
This is the definition. School of thought that believes throughout history there has been worldwide contact via the oceans and trade routes.
And then there's isolationism.
Isolationism is basically became the norm, where it's believed that all of these influences and cultures that have created similar technology and culture, that they all sort of came up with it
on their own
separately, and that there was no diffusion of culture or ideas, and that they weren't, basically they were held back by these oceans and these boundaries.
Right. Couldn't get across the water, couldn't navigate that far.
People that, diffusionism was 1920s became really big. John Keel, the Mothman prophecies.
John
Keel. He was really into that in the 70s when it kind of came back around.
He's great.
Let's see. Yeah. So that's diffusionism, isolationism.
Remember how to say this name?
Go ahead. Jeffrey pronounced it a few times.
As best I can remember, the name is Ailes Herdlitzka. And he was hired by the Smithsonian in 1910 to be the curator of the Division of Physical Anthropology. Previous to that, he was involved in the eugenics movement. It was pre-Nazism philosophy, funded by the Rockefeller Foundation.
Yep.
Herdlitzka would have bones and skeletons sent to him, and they would just disappear. So when we talk about evidence, where are the bones, where are the skeletons? In a lot of those articles and a lot of those finds and a lot of those digs, they were sent to the Smithsonian.
Yeah.
Or the Smithsonian representative was there.
Right.
So I find it hard to believe that if you have that many accounts and documented encounters, that's all fabricated. That's all fluff. That seems very hard to believe. But what have you.
Right. But yeah, I mean, the government was at war they were at war with all these tribes.
Right.
And they're trying to come in and, continue to spread the American dream.
So it's a strategy plan. It's a think tank, the Smithsonian, and all of these different factions of it to
maybe.
It seems like.
I mean,
from what they said, the government did not want to identify the Native Americans as, true human beings, because we would not be able to take their land if we actually gave them,
And I believe their stance is that was not their, like now, I don't think they claim to have ever really had that view. That's where it gets kind of tricky.
Right.
Now if you can't just go into the Smithsonian and say, hey, where's all these artifacts? Where's the bones?
Right.
And so it gets a little weird with how to approach.
Right. How do you figure out what the heck is going on?
Yeah. But it's fun to talk about.
I love talking
who
about
knows what really happened? That's the whole thing is it's cool to just explore, and it's like it's crazy that that's even a thing. Like there's people are writing these books.
Right.
And all of them talk about the Smithsonian and different institutions and being part of the eugenics movements, which is funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. And there's, old museum annual reports, and, they're out there raising all these questions, and the Smithsonian is kind of denying specific finds.
Right.
Where there's stories of them kind of coming and taking an artifact, and then when the person that found it wants to know, hey, where's the artifact going to be? Is it going to be in a museum? And then there's just no response.
Right.
So you hear those stories a lot. Yeah. Where they come and take the artifact or skeletons, and then you never really heard anything back.
Right.
So.
And that's, is that what Ross Hamilton was talking about in A Tradition of Giants?
Yeah.
In that quote, he said, combing through the museum's old annual reports has been an education, raising a number of questions regarding the modern Smithsonian's repeated denials of specific, albeit lacking in detail, 19th century finds. Interestingly, there were few or no such denials until the tenure of Ailes Herdlitzka, early 20th century head of anthropology at the museum. Thus, an important, perhaps pivotal question is raised. Why would this gentleman discount the existence of relics carefully recorded in the field reports of his predecessors John Wesley Powell and Cyrus Thomas? Was Herdlitzka simply an apologist, ignorant of his own reliquary's contents, a rank materialist who could have not taken time to search the collections, Or was there something darker creeping insidiously into American anthropology at the highest levels in the early 20th century?
Ross goes hard.
Ross goes hard in the paint.
We'll respect you, Ross.
To steal some slang there. He goes hard in the paint.
Yep, absolutely. I would love to see a debate.
Between who?
Between any of these guys and anyone that says their stance is that it just, I mean, I have really no position. If it's all real and wow, that's amazing, that's cool. But I would just like to see a discussion about it.
An open
forum
debate.
Squash it once and for all.
But I mean, the problem with
You
that,
can't do that. There's no way.
I mean, like that'd be like getting Eddie Bravo to admit the Earth isn't flat.
Love
You're
you,
gonna-
Eddie.
Yeah, not mad at you, but man, there's there's some stones or oppositional forces that are really tough to go against, and no matter what the evidence, both sides will still walk away believing they're correct. And that's where it's like, I've always said I love science or the thought process of it, because it's like, I'm the kind of person, if you give me new information that is more correct than the information I have, I discard my old information and I take the new information.
Yeah.
But if somebody has a very ardent stance on it for whatever reason, whether we think that's, from a cabal standpoint of knowledge withholding, which we could go deep into that. Yeah, I mean, there's a funneled method to giving information to the masses. And this is probably no different of a case than any other.
Back then.
Yeah. So
Newspapers were your only access to information.
right.
I mean, there were books and magazines and
Right.
stuff like that, but
Right. But it seems like in that stance, if you want to try to get honest answers, it's going to be difficult, because it seems like we've already looked over it. There is an agenda. There is a narrative that's being kind of pushed for a multitude of reasons. But like I said earlier, the Smithsonian shows up quite a bit. And that's why I keep making a kind of a joke about it. Like, the Smithsonian, look out, they're going to be there. They're going to show up at your picnic. Because in the summer of 1883, James A. Faulkner unearthed an unusually large human skeleton in the same area of Dr. Samuel Kramer of Smithtown. Was called in and measured the skeleton, which found out it was 7 foot 4 inches long, and deduced that it belonged to a person who was almost 8 feet tall. That same year, the Smithsonian Institution dispatched a team of archaeologists to the Creel Mound in South Charleston, led by Colonel Lewis Morris. The team conducted extensive digs of some 50 mounds in the area and issued a detailed report. In their investigation, the team uncovered numerous giants, one of which was 7 foot 6 inches tall and decorated with 6 heavy copper bracelets on each wrist, and on his shoulders were 3 large plates of mica. In another mound, they found a circle of 10 skeletons surrounding a giant skeleton, as well as underground vaults, various copper and mica ornaments, jewelry, religious items, pipes, spearheads. And then there was another large skeleton that was found that had a flathead type skull, which I'm not sure what that means. Flathead, like the top of it was flat, the front was like a drive-in movie theater.
yeah, I don't know.
I'm not sure how that goes.
But there were lots of jewelry, ornaments, religious items,
Yeah.
pipes, spearheads.
Yeah.
And, there's John Wesley Powell and Cyrus Thomas have their own account. This is from Ross's book, Ross Hamilton's book. And it's number 5, the largest of the group, was carefully examined. 2 feet below the surface, near the apex, was a skeleton, doubtless an intrusive Indian burial mound. Indian burial near the original surface, 10 or 12 feet from the center. On the lower side, lying full length on its back, was one of the largest skeletons discovered by the Bureau agents. The length, as proved by actual measurement, being 7 and 8 foot immediately. 7 and 8 foot, it was clearly traceable but crumbled into pieces. So immediately after the removal, it just fell apart.
Yeah. Hits the air.
Yeah, you hear that quite a bit.
Well, it gets pretty frail
Really,
because
really
when,
old ones.
right, when we're looking at like dinosaur bones, right, aren't they like basically petrified at that point? Like they fill in
Yeah.
with other materials. It's not the actual bone.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically like a cast or molding of that previous bone.
Right.
So if nothing like that happens, because these are being buried in these mounds and preserve them in a certain state, when you bring them out,
Yep.
there they go.
Yep.
Here's another reason that it's difficult to nail down solid evidence.
Yep.
Other than, the jewelry and the copper gorgets. Now, here's something you could do with that stuff, though. If they still have those, if those came off giants in any instance, couldn't you just take that gorget, put it on someone of a normal size and go, you're trying to get in your daddy's pants there? Like, wear too big of pants for yourself? Like, you're going to look like you're going to be able to measure that unless those aren't from giants. But, that's the physical remains we have. Where we're taking those bracelets and putting on your arm and saying, well,
the size of the artifacts themselves,
that has to have some kind of
will show
correlatory
you,
value.
Yeah. Will show you,
Yeah.
You can kind of gauge how big they are based off of how big that gorget is.
Absolutely. What is this one from the American Antiquarian and Georgia newspaper? Testimony of a skeleton, perhaps a race of giants. So everybody's putting it in their headlines. A large Indian mound has recently been opened and examined by a committee of scientists sent out from the Smithsonian Institution. At some depth from the surface, a kind of vault was found in which was discovered the skeleton of a giant measuring 7 foot 2 inches. His hair was coarse jet black and hung. Oh, we did that one already. That one was already in there.
Was it?
Yeah, that's all right. We'll skip on to the Huntington, West Virginia, June 22nd account. The municipal authorities of Central City, 4 miles west of here, 3 weeks ago, ordered the removal of a prehistoric mound from 13th Street. Today, 12 feet above the base of a mound, a gigantic human skeleton was discovered. It was almost 7 feet in length and of massive proportions. Here's the bracelet, so you could put this on. 8 huge copper bracelets were discovered. These, when burnished, proved to be of the purest beaten copper and a perfect preservation.
Wow.
A curiously inscribed totem was found at the head of the skeleton. The Smithsonian Institution will be notified of the discovery. Again, bring them in. Where does the evidence go?
Yeah.
Like, if you brought these articles to them or brought up, this information, would they actually go, yeah, oh yeah, we remember that, we've got that?
Right.
What happens to that stuff? They just didn't catalog it?
I think their position is that it never happened, which I don't really get that.
Full-fledged denial?
Yeah. That, it's,
I mean,
giants never
amateur
existed.
hour.
There's no lost race. That's their position.
Yeah.
Here's one from Dublin, Ohio. Yeah. This is another Smithsonian visit. Go ahead, Bub.
On the level space enclosed by the ditch, 100 feet from the top of the east line of embankment, is a mound 4 feet high and 35 feet in diameter. On the top were numerous flat stones, which it is said had formed graves enclosing skeletons of very large size, but nothing could be learned as to the manner they were buried. All right, well, little shout out to Dublin, Ohio on that one. Next one we had was in, not in Charleston, but near Charleston, West Virginia, the Great Smith Mound, when Thomas's agent, P.W. Norris, at a depth of 14 feet, a rather large human skeleton was found, which was in partially upright position with the back against a hard clay wall. All the bones were badly decayed, except those of the left wrist, which had been preserved by, again, 2 heavy copper bracelets. 19 feet from the top, the bottom of this debris was reached, wherein the remains of a bark coffin, a skeleton measuring 7.5 feet in length and 19 inches across the shoulders, was discovered. It lay on the bottom of the vault, stretched horizontally on the back, head east, arms by the sides. Each wrist was encircled by 6 heavy copper bracelets. Upon the breast was a copper gorget. Oh, okay, here's a good measurement. Length 31
There you go,
31
Bob.
inches. Greatest width 33 inches. That's pretty.
Yeah. Over
Is
a
that
foot.
for the? Does that go around?
I mean,
Is that measuring
that's
across
over
the
a
chest?
foot. That's fairly large, I'd say.
Great quote by Cyrus Thomas. He says, "I have been and am still disposed to connect the mound builders of the Kanawha Valley with those of western North Carolina, but our explorations in the 2 sections convince us of their close relations with the people of Ohio." Huh. A little bit of migratory building, maybe?
Yeah.
They built those up and then just kind of left them, maybe?
Yeah.
What's this?
No, not that. So this is a quote from Jim Vieira, if you want to read this.
The Smithsonian collected and received thousands of artifacts, treasures, sizable skeletons, and amassed an impressive knowledge of America's earlier inhabitants. If there is no conspiracy, when were all these relics now, and why do they deny they received them? Does the scene of the crated up artifacts and Raiders of the Lost Ark hold any truth? Sounds like he's on that train too. He's got the kind of stance that, you know, they're taking the info or taking the pieces and materials and just boxing them up and putting them away.
Right.
And then from David Hatcher Childress, which, you know, again, love DHC, but his article titled Smithsonian Gate, I'll let you go at that one.
This is back in the 90s.
Yeah.
In a private conversation with a well-known historical researcher who shall remain nameless, I was told that a former employee of the Smithsonian who was dismissed for defending the view of diffusionism in America, basically the heresy that other ancient civilizations may have visited the shores of North and South America during many millennia before Columbus, alleged that the Smithsonian Institute at one time had actually taken a barge full of unusual artifacts out into the Atlantic and dumped them into the ocean.
Okay, and let me say something on that too. That's very possible. I can't remember.
It is a story from a guy as well.
I can't remember what country it was. I want to say it was Brazil.
No evidence, probably.
I want to say it was Brazil. Did something similar. I don't remember what it was, but they found these shipwreck remains that basically showed a different culture coming and possibly settling in that area before what we know is modern day Brazil. What they did was they went out and dumped all of this stuff to cover it up in the ocean. Like, that's again, like we've got this established line of history, you know, and the more we keep digging and digging through that, literally in the earth or into the ocean, the more we find out. And like I said earlier, it's kind of impressive that, you know, we're going forward in time as a society and as a race. Yeah. And at the same time, we don't know the back end history to the very start of it. Like we keep assuming that we have this very good understanding, but it's the old, you know, cliche of saying, if you don't know history and the mistakes of it, you're bound to repeat them.
Yep.
Like, so we're kind of lost to that because we still haven't nailed down like where we actually start. What is, you know, the overall timelines of the world.
Yeah.
It's hard for people to agree upon, and it's hard for us to get all that information without, again, going deeper and deeper. As Richard Dewhurst says, you know, we are shown charts of men becoming bipedal and each new man, quote unquote, being bigger and smarter than the last. This is in direct contradiction to the charts we use for every other animal we study. We only have to look at a bird and be told that it was once a dinosaur to know how false this paradigm of man's growth is. Look at the evolution of most animals, and the records say they got smaller over time, not bigger. However, with all the modern edifices of education built on the theory of evolution and the growing stature of humanity, we can't very well have the Smithsonian running around telling people that we have degenerated from an ancient race of giants who once ruled America. Now can we? So he's you know, he
goes all in.
He's, you know, pleading for this stance. I mean, but it makes sense.
Yeah, it
does. It's hard to discount.
He's a passionate fellow.
Well, and
I love it.
These are the proponents. Now we have the opponents.
So there's a story that we heard recently.
Yeah.
That Ohio State University had a whole cache of 12,000 artifacts. And they had to essentially, they didn't want them anymore.
Yeah.
They didn't have room to store them. They just wanted to give them to, you know, the Ohio Historical Society. Basically took those artifacts, and so they decided they were going to store them in a barn near Serpent Mound.
Right.
And they were there for a few weeks and realized, oh shit, these probably are not secure at all in this barn in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
So they, the story goes that they dug a few trenches, and buried those artifacts in crates and buried them in the ground. And they could only find, when essentially they were told to dig them back up. And so I don't know if it was years later, but they could only find 2 back.
2 of the trenches.
2 of the crates.
Yeah,
back. So
they found like 8,000
like
artifacts.
3 or 4,000 artifacts that are
still there,
buried. So this, Dr. William Romaine, I guess, called Dr. Brad Lepper, and he confirmed that did happen.
Right.
So, whoa.
Right.
That's a little scary. If that's a true story, wow. That is extremely, I mean...
rewriting history.
It makes me a little ill, to be honest, because, that'd be awesome if somebody found those artifacts.
If we only knew where they were. The remaining 4,000 and change.
Wouldn't that be a hell of a documentary?
That would be, but we just need the location.
Yeah, we gotta find that. We gotta find those artifacts.
We could dig that up.
Yeah.
I know how to use a shovel. I'm well equipped with a shovel.
Man, that'd be a wild one.
So, Mikey, what's your take?
It's tough to say because there's just no physical evidence. But the accounts, the newspaper articles, there are a lot. That's the whole thing. There are a lot. And, there's a couple newspaper articles we found so Dr. Bradley Lepper is the head archaeologist at Ohio History Connection. It's right here in Columbus, Ohio. They have an awesome museum downtown. It's really, really, really cool. And so we have an article that Brad Lepper wrote in the Dispatch, because we just wanted to know, we have a lot of these guys that are kind of going hard in the paint at these institutions.
Right.
And so we wanted to find the other side, what, academia and, people from Ohio State and Ohio History Connection and Smithsonian, what are they saying about the giants?
Right.
And with this one, Dr. Lepper talks about, and this is 100% for sure a fake tablet, the Brush Creek stone. And he talks about, I think we talked about it earlier, but if you want to go ahead and just take a look at that paragraph there.
He talks about avocational archaeologist Jeff Karskeden and James Morton have studied the archaeology of Muskingum County for more than 5 decades. Their recent book, Gold and Silver Trinkets and Other Valuable Articles, includes a detailed account of the excavation of Brush Creek Mound by John Everhart in the late 1800s. One of the objects recovered from the mound was a sandstone slab with several circular depressions that might have been used for cracking nuts. 2 months after the stone was unearthed, Everhart announced that it was also inscribed with hieroglyphics, chiefly Greek, commingled with Phoenician and Etruscan. As if that weren't amazing enough, he also claimed that the stone was buried alongside an 8-foot-tall skeleton. Old newspaper stories such as this are typical of the evidence offered to support the extraordinary claims of ancient giants and lost civilizations, but there's a twist to Everhart's story. Evidently, he never paid his workmen, and one of them took him to court, where another testified that he'd never been paid the $15 he'd been promised to carve the inscription on the slab and give it the appearance of the ancient work. So the supposedly ancient inscription was a deliberate fraud. But what about the giant? Everhart published an account. You got something here?
Yeah, so the title of this article, I forgot to introduce that. We just went right into the article. It's Dr. Bradley Lepper, Archaeology, were ancient writings giants pulled from Ohio burial mounds? No. So that's the headline of this article.
Yeah.
And at the bottom, towards the end of the article, he does kind of give his statement about his view.
Yeah, he said many other such old newspaper articles claim that giant skeletons or stones with curious inscriptions were found in other Ohio mounds, and these have provided fodder for a number of recent books, magazine articles, and TV shows that retell these stories, claiming that they're true with no other evidence to back them up. What's the lesson of the Brush Creek tablet? Buyer beware.
So Dr. Leopard's, he's saying that his position basically is that, there's people writing newspapers or magazines and doing TV shows, and people are making money off this stuff, and
Right.
it's being sensationalized, and that's kind of how it's always been, even in the 1800s and 1900s.
Right.
Is they're trying to sell newspapers
Right.
and sell books, and
Right.
so
Giving it the slant that it's sensationalism or, poor journalism.
yeah.
All of these accounts and all of these reports.
Oh, and I 100% agree with him that this tablet and that giant skeleton was fake, no doubt. I believe that to be I believe that to be solid. That was a complete hoax, and so but does that mean all of them are?
Not necessarily.
All of them are hoaxes, based off of some dude that's trying to make money from a tablet.
It's kind of like the Mothman thing when I said,
fake giant.
Do you think that many people are trying to go out and report seeing a giant flying moth, man, bird thing? And why would you want to go out and risk your reputation and livelihood? Maybe it wasn't as detrimental in the days of reporting giants if they were making up that many fake claims.
Right.
But it feels like that just seems too extravagant of an explanation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, just because somebody sees a UFO, not the whole world, not everybody. Yeah, there's people that go out and say they see UFOs, but I believe in UFOs. I'm not going out and telling people just so I can have the sensational story to be in the group, to be a part of the conversation.
You don't want that.
Again, it's not good for you.
No.
It's not good for you. Like a lot of people that, witness abnormal or, supernatural phenomena don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So this is more not on the supernatural phenomena, but that's why I think the reports have more validity.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, you can't properly cross-reference, like, okay, if somebody put up a story, did they actually profit from it? Like how many, like say if there were that many fake stories, how many people profited off of it?
I don't know.
That would be an interesting thought, because I would say it's not that many. Most of them, it seems like, gave their findings.
Yeah, and like
to the Smithsonian.
The local doctor would show up and do the measurements.
Right.
So you have people in the community that are trustworthy and
Right.
normal people.
Right.
So if you pull up this second article from Dr. Lepper,
Yep.
Columbus Dispatch.
Yep.
And
Archaeology, Saga of Giant Mound Builders is a Tall Tale That Won't Go Away, by Bradley Lepper. And he goes on to start, charlatans are still trying to strip American Indians of their heritage by claiming that some mysterious lost race of white people, giants or aliens, built Ohio's ancient earthworks.
Aliens definitely did not.
I wasn't going that route.
No.
He goes on to say, it seems I can no longer give a public program about Ohio's amazing ancient American Indian mounds without someone in the audience asking me about giants or the lost tribes of Israel or even aliens.
Wow.
I try to address these questions politely and explain that there is no hard evidence that any of these things had anything to do with Ohio's mounds.
And he's right. There isn't.
Occasionally.
NAGPRA took care of that.
Well, yeah.
Maybe.
There's a lot of hands in the pot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different spoons stirring the Kool-Aid in this jar.
Yep.
He says, I try to address these questions politely and explain that there's no hard evidence that any of these things had anything to do with Ohio's mounds. Occasionally, if the person asking the question is a true believer, they'll accuse me of lying and even hiding the evidence that would prove me wrong. Some people actually believe that the Ohio History Connection, along with the Smithsonian Institution,
this guy
has skeletons of giant humans in our collections that we keep hidden from the public. The first time someone accused me of this, I was dumbfounded and asked, why on earth would we do that? All I have to say is Michael Cremo. You want to talk about things that are not on display in museums, Michael Cremo probably has seen more than the average bear. That is a gentleman who studies nothing but extreme human antiquity. And even in those instances, we're just talking about the age of humanity itself. That can't be told appropriately because it doesn't fit narratives. Narratives tell the story. Narratives tell that's what history is. It's a story.
Right.
But I want the most accurate story. That's my frustration. So again, when you have people, again, I don't know you, Bradley Lepper, but it seems like if you've studied this that much, you would have come across this as well. And either you don't believe any of it, which, okay, you're open to that, but historically, we're not told the truth.
There is no there is no physical evidence. I mean, he is right. You know, a lot of these things it's stories and it's accounts, and there's no skull that's this big that we can see. Right. So, you know, I see his viewpoint too. But there's also a whole lot of stories
again
that are really, really bizarre. And to say that all those stories are it's all fake and none of it was ever real, and they didn't pull any of these skeletons out, and the descriptions of the jewelry and them sitting upright, and it's
very descriptive.
So, you know, so the last part there, which was kind of...
You want that last part?
Tops it off.
He says, finally, the surprising answer was that the existence of giant humans supposedly would undermine Darwin's theory of evolution, which the priesthood of science was sworn to protect. I pointed out that if the existence of giant sloths during the Ice Age didn't cause any problems for evolutionary theory, Darwin himself excavated one of these skeletons in South America during the period when he was first contemplating how all of life's diversity came to be. Then giant humans wouldn't present much of a problem either. Sadly, such arguments do nothing to persuade diehard conspiracy theorists that they may be wrong.
Yeah, the whole Darwin theory, I don't know. That might be one aspect where, for me, if these guys are writing about, you know, if John Wesley Powell and all these guys are like chummy, and it's kind of like this boys club within academia, you know, I just don't know. But the Darwin thing, I'd more talk about some of the stances of Native Americans being savage, not capable of building these, that it was actually their ancestors, that they actually didn't have the technology themselves to do it. The manifest destiny part of it, I mean, listen, governments have done shittier things.
Right.
That's one of the worst, but they haven't done much crappier things than that.
Right.
And it's just part of the history of how we got here and spread all the way to the West Coast.
Right.
And there was some dark things that went down. So problem is when you're going back that far in time and, you know, they're just stories right now. So I totally see both sides.
I do too.
But it's hard to deny.
Well, that's probably why we're called the Strange Road. I don't think we're looking for the normal path.
It's just a fun conversation.
It's a lot of fun. And again, you would just hope that one day there would be a more coalesced idea of both sides coming together at a certain point, or, you know, accepting the information from each side and kind of coming up with the best answer. But
it feels like there's a lot of combativeness in a way of, you know, like even being approached and people talking to Brad Lepper, Dr. Lepper about, you know, giants at his talks and so forth. I could see how that could get old if he's constantly kind of being barraged with these questions. And
why should that get any older than saying the official narrative of what you've learned or been told? Why?
Yeah, you kind of sense
you're educating on both fronts, so why should it get more frustrating just to answer a simple question? I guess it's more frustrating.
He sounds a little frustrated in this article.
Well, I think it's because if I had to think about it long enough, okay, I'm putting myself in his shoes. Okay, every lecture I've got to tell you or I, we're in the audience going, what about giants? And he's like, hey, dumbass, there are no giants.
Yeah.
But what if it's not just like the polite person? It's like, okay, you said there's no giants. What if this person's like, you're wrong? And they get even more heated. And now you're like, am I being physically threatened because I don't believe in giants? I could see that getting on your nerves.
Yeah.
If you had really, really heated debates every time, or, you know, it would take it out of you to where after a while you wouldn't even want to give it acknowledgement.
Go out there and do your lectures.
Right. It could be.
Yeah.
He just might have had his fill of giant believers, but I'd love to talk to him about giants and why he doesn't believe in them.
It would be cool.
It'd be a great conversation. I would love to get the other side of the coin from
For sure.
from a very
I want to hear I want to hear all the sides.
right.
We don't pick sides at all.
No.
I'm willing to. It's just that on the giant side of thing, there's so much that's been written, really within the last like 7 years or so. These books that we've been kind of tapping into.
Right.
And thanks again for, the information.
Oh,
of
absolutely.
all these books that we covered, to the authors and
Absolutely.
the people that contributed photos to some of these books, like Jeff Wilson, and it's a lot of hard work to put all that research and the sites and have it, big thick books
Right.
that were dense, and this basically approaching like 3 hours right now. It looks like.
Yeah, it is.
So
What else? We got anything else to cover on the giants?
I think right now,
We'll have
we
to-
could make an entire, could be a part 2, easily. So much information on the subject.
I think we'll probably touch on this again at some point. But yeah, if anybody has any vantage points on this, or has studied the subject matter, has some of strong opinions about it, and you can tell us why. Let us know why.
Yeah,
Like I said,
contact us.
We're here to learn
DM,
as much as
hit
we
us up.
talk about it.
Hit us up on Facebook, Instagram. I'd love to have a conversation with people in the comments, or hit us up and tell us what you think. Tell us what you think about the show. And again, check our Instagram page for links to all of the books that we tapped into for our research. You can get those. And this was a fun one.
Oh, yeah.
We went pretty in deep.
Oh, yeah.
And still there's so much more that we could have covered. So it was cool. Like, we had to really pick and choose and kind of get the juicy stuff.
Yeah. If
and
this seems
to,
like long at 3 hours, just imagine if we actually went through every account, every detail. And because it's just so... That's why, to me, it still leaves so much on the table for discussion, for further episodes, or even in other programs down the road. But there's still a lot there, but we covered quite a bit.
And tune in to keep an eye on our socials. We have something brewing, potentially at Serpent Mound for the summer solstice, helping out some folks. Bill Homan, the steward of the Mitchell Hedges Crystal Skull, is going to be potentially doing a talk.
I would lose it.
With Terry and Tom from the Alternate Universe Rock Shop in Locust Grove, Ohio, right outside, right down the road from the Serpent Mound.
That would be awesome.
Stay tuned for that. The Strange Road might be out there helping out.
Yeah. Check us out on Instagram. Check us out on Twitter at The Strange Road, at Bub Ranley on Twitter, at Kyle Stonard on Twitter. Hopefully we keep generating some more content and just keep bringing you guys some good episodes here.
Yeah, absolutely. Peace, everybody.
Later.